Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another Den of Sin. This is Devin. I've got my co-host James with me here. How you doing, James?
I'm doing good, Devin. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. I hear that you've had some interesting weather where you're at since the last time we talked.
Oh, it's been a doozy tonight. Yeah, things over here have been a doozy. We had unprecedented weather here in Texas. We had crazy snowstorms, which unsurprisingly, Texas infrastructure was not prepared for. And not going to get into all the political thing of Texas politics and infrastructure, but basically our system, we are off the national grid for power. And so basically we got snow and everything just went to shit and everything went on hold. We lost, we were pretty lucky, my family. We lost power only for a little bit, but we lost internet for also a little bit, but we mainly had power and internet for the majority. But we didn't have any warm water, but thankfully our pipes weren't too bad. There are people who went the entire time without power, without electricity, and more importantly, without any kind of water at all. Some people's pipes burst and they had severe flooding, all kinds of crazy shit. So yeah, Texas snowstorms are no joke. Since I moved here, it snowed like 3 times since I moved here, which is unprecedented for Texas. Yeah, so we had that. And yeah, I've been dealing with some health issues and nothing crazy, but like sinus infections and stuff. So it's been a doozy over here, but what can you do? How you been, Devin?
I've been okay. I was worried about you for a little bit because I didn't want to contact you during the snowstorm because if you had any power in your phone, I didn't want to be the one sucking it up. I was glad to hear you were doing okay. I got a hold of you as soon as I thought you were on the other side of it. But we have been trying to get together to do this episode.
Right.
You know, for anybody who heard us last week, we are trying something slightly different. This is a pre-planned multi-parter. The entire subject is going to be the films of 1989. I almost said last week. I really need to learn to start saying last episode. But last episode, we covered the...
it definitely wasn't last week, yeah.
No, it was not. This time around, we're going to be covering the action and thriller films of 1989 after doing our comprehensive horror and sci-fi last week. And then the next episode, we're going to try to attack the comedies and dramas of 1989, of which there were several as well. But before we get too far into this, there were a couple that I think kind of qualify for the last episode. They're science fiction movies with more of an action slant. There was one that you had mentioned, and there's another one that I saw for the first time and felt that it belonged more in the last episode, but I want to talk about it anyways. But do you remember the one that we talked about towards the end last time that you wanted to bring up this time?
I'll be honest and say I do not remember. No.
You said, I am paraphrasing here, but it was something along the lines of, I have things to say about robot jocks.
Oh, yeah, robot jocks. Yeah, I have things to say about robot jocks. You're right, though. It definitely kind of straddles the line. You know, it's action film, science fiction. I mean, it's a heavily science fiction premise. It's a Stuart Gordon-directed giant robot movie, which done for Empire Pictures. So, I mean, right then and there, you've got everything you need to know. So, yeah, as a kid, some quick background. So as a kid, I was really into giant robots. I'm still massively into giant robots. But I played games like BattleTech and Robotech. Played the BattleTech game and was really into things like Robotech and stuff. So this was sort of a kind of an homage, or definitely kind of a spiritual brother to those like giant robot cartoons and properties. Anyways, yeah, it's it was stop motion, I believe, for the majority of it. At the time, I thought it was amazing. I thought it was really cool. It was it's like a sort of post-apocalyptic science fiction film, on a really low budget, which, sometimes this can be really, obviously really shitty. But to me, I thought the film was actually pretty impressive, knowing that, an Empire Pictures, knowing that Charles Band produced film and it has no budget. I really liked it. I thought it was fun. It's it's got Paul Kozlow as, the hero of it. So I don't know. You take that for what it's worth. It's a fun robot post-apocalyptic science fiction movie where robots fight, and we're like games like BattleTech and and like properties like Robotech were based on war. This is sort of more of a competitive matches, and there's other giant robot movies, giant robot suit movies that were even came out a little bit after this and stuff. It's a whole kind of its own subgenre, but this, as far as I remember, was the first of its kind. But yeah, it's super fun. I mean, it was a movie that I rented more than a few times, but then I would talk to my friends about it and they thought it was shit. a lot of them wouldn't even, they saw the, they heard about it, they saw the cover art and was like, no, that looks terrible. I was like, no, man, it's a fun movie. But I mean, again, not for everybody, but I think it definitely has, if I'm not mistaken, I do think it was in theaters for like a very, very, very short time. Yeah, but I mean, I thought it was cool. And it was a movie that I would always get psyched for when I would see it play on TV too. It was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was another one of the U.S.A. Up All Night films that you might see pop up there every now and then. But yeah, I mean, it's not a great movie, but again, Stuart Gordon doing, giant robots. I mean, what can you do? What can you say?
I think it had an unfortunate title.
Anyways, but yeah, it's got a really dumb, it does have a really dumb title. I will give you that.
Yeah, I was one of those kids that would have been like, no, I'm not going to watch Robot Jocks. The title of it alone. I
hate jocks.
I was a nerdy kid. Anything that related to jocks wasn't like I was against it. Right. I just automatically assumed I wouldn't relate to it. And it is a little bit of a misleading title. It's not short for jocks as in high school jocks who play sports. It's jocks as in jockeys. They're jockeys on these robots.
Yeah.
So, it would be the same as saying you're a horse jock. What they're doing is different countries are entering their robots and their robot jocks. And rather than going to full-scale war, they're having the battles being done by their robot jocks. And this particular story is about ownership of Alaska. So the stakes are, I guess, high. I don't know. When the stakes in the state of Alaska,
exactly.
Nothing against the state of Alaska, if anyone's listening up there, although I don't think I've ever seen Alaska show up on our list. But if we have new fans in Alaska, sorry, but I'm not entirely sure that those are earth-shattering consequences in a post-apocalyptic world. I'm probably going to be fine with saying, nah, let them have Alaska. But
you'll hear no argument from me.
Stuart Gordon almost cast Jean-Claude Van Damme in the film. I thought that was kind of fun.
It's weird how many movies he was attached to that he didn't star in, that like everybody was trying to get some of that JCVD magic in their films, but it would have been a weird movie for him because I think it wouldn't have, especially at that period, I don't think it would have taken advantage of his talents, but interesting, yeah.
And I think another problem with the tone of it, the writer, Joe Halderman, has publicly stated that he wanted a more dramatic, serious science fiction film, and Stuart Gordon kept on pushing it to liven it up and to be more for kids. Even though there is full nudity in it. So, but what do you expect from the director of The Reanimator? From the director of The Reanimator and From Beyond, this is a kid's movie. Although Stuart Gordon will come up in our comedy episode, so there's something to be said for that as well. But the movie that I saw, I was going to say, I watched Robot Jocks based on your reaction when it came up last episode. And I will say, people should see Robot Jocks. If they like having fun at the movies, Robot Jocks is a lot more fun than I think most people are giving it credit for.
I agree, I understand. That's the thing. When you hear the premise, that's exactly what, I mean, it's not misleading as far as like, it's a giant piloted robot fighting battle movie. So that's either going to appeal to you or it's not. So, I mean, you'll know right away if that's a movie you need to see. And I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, I hope the answer to that is yes, but it might be no, and no judgment.
Now, the movie I wanted to talk about that I think qualifies more for the last episode, but we'll bring it up here because it's also an action movie, was a movie that I hadn't seen before this week that I'm hoping you've seen, because if you haven't, you have to. It's a film called Shocking Dark, or at least it's called Shocking Dark in the United States.
It is. Yes, I have seen. In fact, I own the Blu-ray that who put out? Was it Culture? Or no, somebody put out the was Severin?
Severin did it, yeah.
Yes, yeah. It's funny because I'd seen it. I'd already seen it, but I haven't actually watched the Blu-ray. I have this problem, Devin. I don't know if you have it. I know bought in so many movies over the last while that I now have a stack of movies that I haven't seen since I haven't seen the Blu-ray version of it. I mean, won't go into, I mean, Gabby doesn't listen to this podcast, so she, but I spent a lot of money around Christmas time on a bunch of Blu-rays. Shocking Dark was one of them, but it's, I remember the movie. In fact, I think I was actually doing a comic book, and one of my friends was like, oh, this kind of reminds me of Shocking Dark, and I was like, oh shit, that's right. I remember that movie, and kind of had to reinvestigate the movie just to make sure that this thing I was doing, which was satirical in nature, so even if it was kind of inspired by Shocking Dark, wouldn't have been. Anyways, interesting movie. It's a ripoff of so many different things all at the same time, which was Anyways, I'll let you talk about it. But yes, it's an interesting movie.
Yeah, I was going to say, if your comic book was anything like Shocking Dark, I don't think they'd be able to come at you on any kind of copyright infringement. Because Shocking Dark, I don't know.
Yeah, because
I don't know if it ever got a release in the United States when it was new. From what I read, it was never released in the United States until Severin put it out on Blu-ray a couple years ago. But it was notorious because here it's called Shocking Dark, but in Europe it was called Terminator 2, which was blatant copyright infringement. It's additionally funny because, there's a Terminator kind of character in it, especially towards the end, but ultimately they really should have called it Aliens 3, because that movie is the biggest ripoff of James Cameron's Aliens that I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of Aliens ripoffs.
So I'm pretty sure... So, like, at like the conventions and stuff, they've across the United States, across the world, probably, there's always the booths that sell bootleg movies and out of print movies that they'll do just a shitty VHS rip on or whatever. And I think the first time I saw it, I think it was actually titled like Aliens 2 or Aliens something. It was definitely, I think besides it being titled like a Terminator ripoff, I'm pretty sure it was also like, I remember the cover art being very Aliens inspired the first time I saw it, which is in fact, that's probably actually the first time I saw it was like, it was like titled like, I honestly don't remember, but it was either titled like Terminator 2 or Aliens 2, or had some sort of like, I remember at like going like, what the fuck is this? And then, reading the box, but it was definitely, it was heavily trying to, in much way the Italians do, it was definitely trying to like, make you think it was a movie it wasn't. So, and I know for a fact, I definitely remember having a strong Aliens inspired, like either title or, marketing or whatever, like, the cover art. But yeah,
there's a coveted poster for the foreign release. There's collectors that really like the Terminator 2 version of the poster, because who wouldn't? That's the version I would get if I wanted to get a poster. It should be also pointed out, Bruno Mattei is the director of this film, and he's notorious for doing this type of thing over and over and over again. He's apparently a connoisseur of American films, because he also got into a little bit of trouble making a movie that here was titled Cruel Jaws, that in other territories was marketed as Jaws 5. So
that's right.
Yeah, it's not just James Cameron he comes after. He comes after Spielberg and anybody else that seems to make money on a international scale. But it's a fun movie. It's a fun watch. You're going to laugh your ass off. You will never be scared or even really thrilled at any given point. But if you like bad movies, and especially if you like international ripoffs of American movies, then Shocking Dark is definitely for you. Now, to move on to a couple of titles that people might be a little bit better acquainted with. The number 1 and number 2 movie of 1989 were both action films. I actually think it's kind of interesting because the number 1 and the number 2 are the same between worldwide grosses and domestic grosses, but their positions are switched. The two films are Batman, the very first one by Tim Burton, and that was number 1 in the United States and number 2 worldwide. And then the other was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which was number 1 worldwide, but number 2 domestically. So it's kind of an interesting swap there. I honestly don't think that today's world market would make Batman a number 2.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. By that point, though, Indiana Jones was a giant franchise. But yeah, it is weird that would have a more global appeal than Batman. Batman was still a very recognizable character worldwide, even by 1989. But superhero movies hadn't done that well.
There hadn't been a major superhero film in the United States since probably Superman 2, because Superman 3 and 4 were kind of disappointments.
Big old duds, yep.
Yeah, it's actually equally weird that it took them so long to get around to doing Batman. And of course, there were several false starts in the early 80s. They wanted to make Batman for a long time. In fact, it's rumored that one of the versions from the early 80s was going to be directed by Ivan Reitman and starring Bill Murray. And I can only anticipate that was going to have some sort of an Adam West tinge to it.
Oh, of course. Yeah. You would have to imagine. As much as I love Bill Murray, that was not going to be a serious movie.
But Warner Brothers pushed on, and they also tried to get Richard Donner to do it, which seemed like a pretty logical choice to me. But Richard Donner was actually already busy making his own action film to come out in 1989, which I'm sure we'll get to here in a minute. But you can tell pretty soon after the whole Reitman thing, you can tell that Warner Brothers wanted to take their Batman story into a darker direction, because the other people rumored to have been offered are Joe Dante, Alex Cox of Repo Man, Wes Craven, John Carpenter, David Cronenberg, Ridley Scott, George Miller, Brian De Palma, Sam Raimi, David Lynch, and the Coen brothers, all who gave a pretty hard definitive pass.
Crazy.
Yeah, I would actually love to see what David Lynch's Joker would have been. My guess is Crispin Glover, but but they went with Tim Burton.
Yeah, as it should have been in the first place.
Yes, and Tim Burton really did his own thing with it, and even he is kind of hot and cold on this movie. Now, I loved it when it came out. I was completely swept up in the Batmania. I know you did too. You had all the T-shirts and the buttons and the hats and the tie. I even had the Batman Converse, like the Chuck Taylor Converse that were high tops with Batman symbols all over it. I love those. And I still wear Converse to this day. That was my first pair
I
of
didn't
Converse.
have those, but weirdly though, a couple of years ago, Converse actually got the DC license. They were doing, but all their Batman, they did a bunch of Batman Converse that were literally an homage to the artwork they did in '89 for the Batman film. So it was that same kind of artwork, same time period of the art, same art style, and then with all the crazy colors. So I saw them at a Journeys. I was like, holy shit, I wish I could afford to buy these at the moment, but I know knowingly I would never wear them. I too was swept up in the Bat craze. I still remember watching an episode of Doogie Howser, MD, and in the episode, Doogie Howser was super excited to see it. They talked about throughout it wasn't the main plot of the main plot of the episode, but you know, it got brought up. In fact, at the very last line, they're like leaving the hospital. He's like, "Hey, so you guys want to go see Batman with me again?" And I just remember thinking, like, that's how big this movie is. Like, they're talking about it in sitcoms, like, and that wasn't, and that really wasn't the thing people did back. I mean, it wasn't.
Sitcoms were not pop culturally self-aware then.
Exactly. It was, you know, there wasn't that meta-ness, but again, but it does speak to how huge Batman was culturally. I have my own distinct opinion on the movies and feelings, and did at the time, and I'll go a little bit more into that in a second, but why don't you tell me your feelings on the Batman movie?
I still love it. I think Batman Returns is technically the better film, if you want to get down to it. I think Michael Keaton was actually really good casting. His Bruce Wayne was a little bit darker than he probably should have been, but I think even had they made his Bruce Wayne a little bit lighter, Keaton would have been the man for the role. When Burton signed on to do it, Alec Baldwin was lobbying really hard for the role. And apparently he held a resentment towards Tim Burton for years, because the way Alec Baldwin puts it was, I begged him for the role and he gave it to fucking Beetlejuice, which, if people remember, Baldwin is in Beetlejuice. So there was grounds for him to ask Burton for that role. Baldwin would have been good in that role. But I don't think anyone could top Keaton. It could just be like Christopher Reeve. I can't imagine anyone else in that time because of the way it was done. But that's why he did The Shadow, was to kind of get even. And well, we know how that turned out.
I was going to say, yeah, exactly. But I do think on paper, Alec Baldwin is one of those sort of, he was so the perfect Bruce Wayne on paper with his looks, his acting ability, his relative size, that it's weird that he never, like, that he wasn't Batman. Even though it was definitely cast against type, I do think Michael Keaton brought, again, we live in a time where, thanks to the internet, any bit of, movie news, casting news, especially nerd related, anything that's based off an existing property gets dissected and torn apart. But even before the internet, people were not happy that Keaton was cast. And I think he proved most people wrong. Like, again, Burton wasn't a fan of the source material, especially the comics. In fact, Kevin Smith has a very funny comment about that. But he had his idea of who Batman was, and I think he was a good enough director that it worked. Like, he managed to basically make a version of the character that suited his vision, but also worked as a film. And I think that's why Keaton's one of my all-time favorites. I mean, going back to my childhood, Mr. Mom, I always loved Keaton. To this day, like, I was just, I think I said on a recent, I don't know if it was our podcast or another podcast, but I was, saying about how in the last few years, I think Keaton has become, I think, even more than ever, if I see Keaton attached to a property, I want to see it, because he's fucking he's hitting his stride, But anyways, But yeah, I agree with you. I do agree with you 100%. I do think Burton not understanding the property and really embracing what the dynamics of the character, that dichotomy of Bruce Wayne is this aloof playboy, this sort of guy who doesn't take anything too serious, and people think he's kind of a vapid airhead, spoiled brat guy. And then Batman is a brooding, ass-kicking Dark Knight. That works in the comics. That's the Bruce Wayne I grew up with. That relationship between Bruce Wayne and his alter ego. That's not in the movie. And again, you would think logically in the context of that universe, if I was just a person in Gotham, I'd be like, hey, I wonder if Batman is that rich brooding dude that lives in the bat-infested fucking mansion. But having said that, and I also agree with you that Batman Returns, I think, is the best of the Batman films. It's the one that strays the farthest from any allegiance to the source material. But in a way, that's fine. I think Burton made it complete. First off, I don't give a shit how different from the comics it is. And again, I'll get into this, but I'm a comic book guy. I've managed comic book stores. I've drawn comics. I've been in that, I've been part of that lifestyle since I was 10 years old and started collecting comics in 87. You would think of anybody, I would be like, as a diehard comic fan, that Batman Returns would piss me off. That is still the best iteration of Catwoman we will ever see. Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman is just perfect. Anyways, I don't want to pontificate too much about this, but I agree with you. I think it's the most enjoyable, even though it gets crazy and fucking, penguins with missile launchers, and the Max Shrek character is such a weird left field character, but great, because who doesn't want to see fucking Christopher Walken, in a Batman movie? But anyways, yeah, I'm sorry. I sort of ran on, but anyways, you were saying.
It's all good, but there is another bit of casting that I think everyone's going to know where I'm going with this. But there was another bit of casting in the original Batman that people were excited about. And this was actually much more welcomed by the fans than Michael Keaton upon the news of it. But I think has interestingly been one of the elements that's been more soured with time. And that's obviously Jack Nicholson as the Joker. And I've heard you speak on, Jack Nicholson's my favorite movie star. I'm not sure if I have a favorite actor at this point. I think I have to categorize them. Jack Nicholson is my favorite movie star because he could be sitting there watching the wind blow and my eyeballs would go right to him. And I'm just entertained by anything he does. And I think he does a fine job with this, but I don't know that, kind of like what you were saying, like it's not true to the comic book. I don't think he makes a good comic book Joker, but I think he makes a pretty fair 1989 Batman Joker. I think he makes a good Tim Burton universe Joker, rather. I've heard your thoughts on this. Maybe you'd like to share, because you're not as big of a fan of the Jack Nicholson performance in Batman.
No, and I mean, to be fair, a lot of that is my own preconceived notions of who the character is. By 89, I'd been collecting comics for a few years at that point. And between 86 and 89, there were some really definitive versions of the Joker. But he was always portrayed physically as this ultra lanky skin. In a universe where everybody's jacked up, super buff. He's this one character whose body type sort of stood out against the rest. This lanky, skinny guy. There's this artist named Brian Bolland who did all these covers. Or he did the covers and the art for The Killing Joke, which is still, a very definitive piece of, comic book fiction that so many versions of the Joker has been referenced and paid homage to. But he just, he just looked a certain way, this almost like this out of control green pompadour, like his full head of hair. Basically, physically, he's the exact opposite of what we got Jack Nicholson at the time. So even as 12 years old, I was like, I don't know. He's a little too old and fat to play the Joker. And here's the thing: is on paper, even at 12 years old, even in 1989, I was like, yes, if we are getting One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest Jack Nicholson, or even more accurately, if we're getting the Shining Jack Nicholson, that level of performance and unhinged brilliance, then yeah, I'm all about it. But that's not what we got. Now, the Joker at the time, the character of the Joker had just started to be, up until probably 85, the character of the Joker wasn't as truly deranged as they had made him. It wasn't until Neil Adams wrote the character to be dangerously crazy, not just the clown prince of crime, where we started to see what now is the modern iteration of Joker, what we understand the character to be now. But by 89, that character had sort of, yes, he was still a goof. He made stupid jokes and the laugh and all that stuff was there, but he had started to evolve into, that this is post The Killing Joke, where he basically fucking crippled Barbara Gordon, and there was like
he'd already murdered motherfucking Robin
comic, but yeah, with a crowbar. But so I had a different version of the character going. Like, I wanted to see something different than what I got. with hindsight, I think my biggest problem with Joker isn't with Jack Nicholson's performance, isn't the fact that he's a little too old, a little too fat, a little too balding to play the character. It's just like, it's not the Jack, you can see, to me, it almost feels like Jack Nicholson was a little bit phoning it in at that time, like he was resting on his laurels. Maybe the fault is with the script. Maybe the script for him wasn't as strong, but I just picture a different universe where we got a 30-year-old, Jack in that role. Or my biggest thing is some of the other people that were mentioned as being considered for that role who were used to sort of tease and get Jack Nicholson involvement. There's two I know specifically that are really interesting, one of which I would have died to have seen as the Joker, but we'll get into that in a second. I know you have something to say about that as well. But yeah, my thing is just like, I was swept up in the craze, but I still think it's a very flawed Batman movie. I will say, though, I've gone on record as saying aesthetically and all, there's a lot of stuff that Burton did. I mean, he created his own version of Gotham and all this Gothic architecture, and everything had to, like, the film had a whole character. I mean, a lot of Batman shoots things, and it's very un-Batman-like, but to the day I die, I still think it is the best physical version of Batman we've ever gotten. As far as, I do think that the modern Ben Affleck Batman, or the Batfleck Batman, it looks like the most like a comic book drawing. In fact, it looks like a specific guy named Jim Lee's version. This like giant buff, the costume, everything looks like a comic book. To me, I still think aesthetically, the first two Burton Batmans, the Keaton Batmans, I think are fucking perfect. The silhouette, everything about it. And I was very against it as a kid. I was like, Batman's gray and black or gray and blue. Not this whole black bullshit, but I know as an adult, I think it's the coolest looking Batman we've ever gotten. In fact, I think we've gotten progressively worse in cinema with his costume almost. But Devin, I know as you're a film historian, you always have those juicy tidbits. You had mentioned somebody that might have also been cast as the Joker. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, the world may never actually know how close he got to actually playing the Joker or whether he was even legitimately offered the role. But there was a bit of a yo-yo thing going on here with Warner Brothers offering the part to Robin Williams. And Robin Williams found out later that Jack Nicholson had been offered the Joker first, and he was kind of floundering because he was a point in his career where he didn't know if he wanted to do something that physical or whatever. I mean, the guy had already won 2 Oscars at that point. He certainly didn't need the money, but he was a Joker fan. And he was starting to think, oh, maybe I'm going to pass on this thing. I don't know this director. And, the last thing he had done was Beetlejuice and Pee-wee's Big Adventure. So they went to Robin Williams, from what it sounds like. So they went to Robin Williams specifically so they could go back to Jack Nicholson and say, don't worry about it. Robin Williams is probably going to do it. We just offered it to Williams, which of course made Nicholson say, you know what? I think I'll do it. Because suddenly it wasn't just a part going to another actor. It was a part going to another actor who he knew could have probably nailed it, especially 1989 post Good Morning Vietnam, Robin Williams.
Yeah, absolutely.
Robin Williams, as it turned out, ended up having a good 1989 anyways, but we'll get into that in the drama episode.
That's right.
But Robin Williams, when he found out about kind of being held up as bait for Jack Nicholson to take the role, he was so incensed by it. He refused to work for Warner Brothers for years before they finally offered him an apology. So who knows what other kind of parts we might have missed out on Robin Williams having because Warner Brothers basically used him.
But I mean, he has to understand at the time that was, I mean,
now, just because something's par for the course don't make it cool.
No, I agree. I mean, again, I will say though that obviously he wasn't alone. Maybe not with the same cachet that Robin Williams brings to that sort of a negotiation type deal.
Oh, but, real quick, before you say, just to put the final cap on Robin Williams, this is officially the reason why Robin Williams did not play the Riddler 2 movies later, and Jim Carrey took it. That was initially offered to Williams as well, and he said, no, I don't work with you guys.
I will say, though, I mean, Jim Carrey's Riddler is fucking awful. Jim Carrey should have been the fucking Riddler. I mean, the Joker, honestly. In fact, physically speaking, he would have been, at that time, the perfect Joker. The physicality, the lankiness, the height, the skinniness, what he could do with his face. The fact that, I mean, basically, his Riddler is basically like a second-rate Joker anyways, in
Batman Forever.
Batman movie.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was like, I don't know if it's Batman and Robin or Batman Forever. I switched those 2 titles around.
I remember the McDonald's cups I got for that movie better than I remember that movie.
Yeah, that movie's terrible. Fucking Tommy Lee Jones. Although people look it up. There's a funny story about Tommy Lee Jones and Jim Carrey and how much Tommy Lee Jones hated Jim Carrey without ever meeting him. And there's a funny story about that. You can look it up online. But also offered the role, and it was rumored for a long time, and then he actually did address it. And I still say this would have been my dream casting at that time, was Tim Curry. There was a lot of rumors, and he had never addressed it just like 3 or 4 years ago. He did say, look, he was offered it, but then his agent said they are also talking to, or they did already pre-offer it to Jack Nicholson, and he's like, oh, I'm not getting this movie. There's no way I'm getting this movie. But it was just nice to be asked. And I guess Burton was a fan and thought, he would be good, but the studio was never going to go with it. But again, I think as a fan, you think, Jesus Christ, if you could see what Tim Curry could have done with that role.
I had no idea about that. I had no idea Tim Curry was in any kind of position for it. But now I'm honestly curious if he turned to his agent and said, get me the next clown role.
Exactly, right? Exactly. I want to be a scary clown. Exactly. But yeah, that's a great even analogy there. Like, think about, what was capable of doing around this time, something like Pennywise.
Especially in the hands of Burton.
Exactly. So that's unfortunate. And I think I'm more bitter about that than anything else. Now, having said that, coming full circle, I will say my piece is that I used to be much more bitter about that movie. I've come to sort of accept it for what it is. And even accept that, yeah, there are things about the Joker performance I can still sort of like enjoy. It was something I got more and more disgruntled as the years went by, because in 89, I was like, yeah, it's cool. And then I'd watch it again and be like, yeah, I just wish this was different. I wish this was different. And sort of steamrolling into the sort of dream casting, fantasy casting bullshit that you're inevitably going to do if you're a fan of the material. But they're still great. And I still think the physical makeup they did still holds up really well. I still prefer that look to the other cinematic Jokers we've gotten as far as the overall makeup design. Physically changing the proportion of Jack Nicholson's face, could have come off really corny, but I think they pulled it off as best as they ever could. I will give it its props there. It was a huge cultural landmark in cinema and pop culture, and sort of especially for comic books. So even though I'm not the biggest fan of it, I will say that even of the Burton versions, I would much rather rewatch, Batman Returns. I still think it's give it its due, and I tip my hat to Burton for making his version of the character.
Agreed. I don't think it's held up particularly great, but my memories of it have, and it's there to serve that purpose. The final word I will say on all of the Burton Batmans is, if you ask my 12-year-old stepdaughter who plays Batman, she will say Adam West. And that's kind of how I've raised my family here.
That's right.
Well, there's a lot more I could say about Batman, but I think we should probably lead on to something else. I do want to say something about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I know you are not a fan, so I will let you say your piece first if you would like, and then I'll tell you why. Because I don't know when Indiana Jones is going to come up again, and I want to say my piece as to why Indiana Jones is important to me.
So here's a weird thing. I never connected with the character, especially not the way that a lot of I had a friend at this time, the time this movie came out, my friend Donovan Jeffcoat, big ups to Dr. Jeffcoat. He was the biggest. He was a Star Wars fan. Back when he was a diehard fan, post Jedi, when there wasn't like the raving fandom that there is now. But his favorite movie of all time was Empire Strikes Back. But his second favorite film franchise was the Indiana Jones films. And I like old adventure serials from the 40s. I like all the stuff it's sort of an homage to. I just never connected with the film the way that friends of mine did, or that the pop culture in general. For a long time, my favorite one was the one that everybody hated, but now has sort of come to be more embraced, which was Temple of Doom. I thought that was the most fun one. Kali Ma and all that. But
that's the honestly, one I've seen the most.
Yeah, because it's the most fun. It's the most digestible. But by Last Crusade, I could give a shit. And of course I watched it because I felt like, you had to. But, everybody's like, oh, it's got a young River Phoenix. It's got, I'm blanking on the most legendary Scottish actor of all time.
Sean Connery?
Sean Connery, thank you. But I just didn't care. I've probably seen the movie maybe twice, possibly 3 times, but not in like 20 years. And it's not a movie. I know if for fans of this podcast, if you listen to podcasts, you probably love the Indiana Jones franchise. You probably think I'm a maniac. You probably think I'm an idiot. I just never connected to me. It's never been something I've gravitated. So
I think there's a lot of reasons why people did latch on to Indiana Jones. I think superficially people hooked on to Indiana Jones just because the names Spielberg and Lucas were attached, and people were, up until Howard the Duck, pretty much willing to go on any ride that they invited them to go on. For me, Indiana Jones, on a very personal level, it was a very influential movie on me. for those who don't know me and haven't heard this story told a million times, my first memory of life is going to the movies. I went to the drive-in and I saw the first Superman with Chris Reeve. By the time I was about 3 years old, I was so into movies, I had already decided that I wanted to make movies when I grew up. Now, I had no idea what that meant. It just meant that I wanted to put on costumes and play for a living, and I still do. But as I got older, I decided my place was really behind the camera. But at that age, two things that I learned from Indiana Jones. The first off, instantly seeing Harrison Ford in the part and realizing, holy shit. Well, I wasn't saying holy shit when I was 3, but but seeing Harrison Ford and let's say wowee. So wowee, that's Han Solo. And putting that together really gave me, like, it clicked in my head. Like, I know what they're doing now. These are people that do this on purpose. And it's not just that videos were randomly recording them. They do this and they probably get money for it. And that led to me being at least somewhat a little more sophisticated than most 3-year-olds, I think, in realizing that this was all make-believe. And after that, it was actually even hard for scary movies to scare me because I knew it was all play. I knew it was all acting, everything that I saw. The way that Indiana Jones impacted me as time went on, and I'm not talking about growing into adulthood, I mean still as I got to be like 6 or 7 and understand who directors are and how much of a collaborative effort it is to make a movie, I was still kind of an age where I could watch Star Wars and think of it as something entirely new because I didn't have the frame of reference of the Flash Gordon movies yet. I hadn't grown up with it. I mean, it would be another 20 years before I saw any of the Kurosawa movies that inspired Star Wars. But with Indiana Jones, I could see Tarzan movies where like Spielberg had directly lifted lines for Temple of Doom out of some of the Tarzan movies and Mummy movies and Gunga Din and these other things that were on TV. And there was a lot of black and white TV when we were growing up because we didn't have a million channels.
That's right.
And so there was a lot of old TV being rerun, you know, My Three Sons and all this other stuff. And they all dressed like, you know, they all had fedoras. And that was my understanding of it. And it was the first movie that by nature of all that taught me what a period piece really was and taught me what a tribute piece could be. And that's something I still extensively use in my writing today. Almost everything I write is a tribute to something that I truly love. And that concept, the awareness of that concept was awakened by me as a child by the Indiana Jones films. So that's why I will always go to bat for Indiana Jones.
That's really interesting.
After having said all that, we've not talked at all about the movie. I do like Last Crusade. I think all of the originals are better than the new one, but I don't hate the new one nearly as much as everybody else does. I think
most people.
I think the Crystal Skull movie was just as dumb as Temple of Doom. Like, if you can believe that he fell out of a plane and used a inflatable raft as a parachute and then a sled, and then went down the rapids and survived all of that, then yeah, that dude is clearly powerful enough to crawl inside of a refrigerator to protect himself from a nuclear blast. Atomic blast.
Well, I mean, he also walked across an invisible bridge in the movie we're talking about. So
yeah,
far-fetchedness has been a staple of these movies since Temple of Doom. So
and it did grow appropriately from, you know, the adventure tales of the 30s to the more popular science fiction stories of the 50s where Crystal Skulls take place. Now, was it a great film? No. Do I hate Shia LaBeouf in it? Absolutely, as much as everybody else does. But everything else around it, I thought it was fun, and I'll be interested in seeing the new one. Last thing I guess I'll really say about the about Last Crusade, my one real fun fact for it was that if Sean Connery had passed, Gregory Peck was standing by on deck to play Indy's dad, and that would have been interesting as well.
Oh, I think that would have been better, honestly. Like,
possibly, yeah. I know they went for the Bond thing. They specifically wanted James Bond to be Indiana Jones's dad, but I don't draw such a parallel between those characters as Steven Spielberg seems to. I think that Tarzan was as much of the father of Indiana Jones as James Bond was.
Well, that's the thing is, like, they're so different as characters. Indiana Jones, as whatever you want to say, isn't a smooth, like, he's not very smooth. Like, he's sort of like this grumpy, almost more everyman, which is, you know, I think why the character worked is like, so much about those type of characters, like, like he hates snakes and like he's a real guy. Like he's a more grounded guy, where James Bond is like the coolest of the cool, the slickest of the slick, ladies man and stuff like. So for that reason, maybe that dichotomy would have been interesting on paper, but I don't think, and again, it's been a long time since I've seen the movie, but that's not who we got in Sean Connery anyway. So, but I don't know, I think Gregory Peck would have been amazing myself, but
I think in general, Gregory Peck could outact Sean Connery on any given day. I don't think Connery was ever really given his full credit as an actor. And I think Gregory Peck might actually be a little overrated, but somewhere in the middle, I really do think.
I just think I can see him in that role. Really, I don't know. I just, to me, it works. And I also just buy Gregory Peck as Harrison Ford's dad more than I buy Sean Connery as Harrison Ford personally. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, I know people love it. Like, again, it's been a while since I've seen it. River Phoenix doesn't. His portrayal of like a young Indiana Jones it's not in it very much, right?
Yeah, it's just the opening bit. The Indiana Jones movies always start with an opening action bit, which is the same thing. 007 does the same thing. So there is the influence there, but it's also.
But I remember people being like, "Fuck," basically like jacking off over how amazing River Phoenix was in that. And at the time, I couldn't have cared less. And again, this is I liked River Phoenix as an actor, even, the films I'd seen him. He had this reputation of being like modern for the time, but the modern day James Dean, like he had that sort of enigma even before he died. And I think obviously anybody who's even remotely famous dies like as a young person. We begin to, deify them and idolize them and stuff and really build their importance to maybe an unhealthy or unrealistic level. But I remember River Phoenix had that, he basically had like next big thing, at that point. But I do remember being sort of annoyed at the time of like, people talking about how great River Phoenix was in it. And he's in it for like 5 minutes. Like at the time, I just thought it was annoying even as a kid, but I didn't get it. But that's a personal thing.
Phoenix said he was doing an impression of Harrison Ford, which I think is fun because they were pals. In fact, Ford, the one who practically insisted that Phoenix play young him because he saw so much promise in him. But in all honesty, I mean, as much as I love Indiana Jones, I got to say, if you want to see the ultimate pairing of River Phoenix and Harrison Ford, where both of them brought their acting game, Mosquito Coast was a really strong movie that is kind of being forgotten today. But that wasn't a 1989 movie, so I'm not going to get too far into it.
Well, speaking of 1989, there's so many movies we need to talk about. So many movies in the action genre. Some of my favorite action films at the time. Did we talk about like Swamp Thing? I don't remember.
No, we didn't, but it's on my list, so go ahead and bring up Swamp Thing.
Well, that's just a random one. Okay, well, I'll talk about that really quickly. Return of Swamp Thing. I love it, of course. I think Dick Durock as Swamp Thing I just loved his performance. Again, as a fan of the comics, the Bernie Wrightson artwork and the character, I thought he looked awesome. I loved, man in suit anyways. I missed those days, man in rubber suit. But I thought the rubber suit was amazing. Heather Locklear, rewatching it even in the last few years, like, wow, not that Heather Locklear was ever a great actress, but she was at least serviceable in later roles and on television roles. But man, she was awful in this. I still liked it. I liked how it sort of took the first film and sort of ramped it up. We got more monsters and crazier effects and stuff. But is it a great movie? No, it's not. It's terrible. But I still love it. Weirdly enough, I think even of the Wes Craven original and this, I still kind of prefer Return of the Swamp Thing. Just I think aesthetically in it. I think just because as a kid, as much as I loved the first Swamp Thing, and I genuinely loved Swamp Thing as a kid, it wasn't even like an irony thing. I genuinely loved the first film. I think this one at the time just had more of what I want, more gory effects or more like creepy monsters and ramped it up a little bit. It's not a good movie. I will admit it's not the greatest movie on earth. So
no, but it is fun. And they were kind of trying to correct the course somewhat. The Wes Craven original Swamp Thing, you're absolutely right. I love that movie. I think it's technically the better movie.
Oh yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
And I think that the Swamp Thing comic books are quite dark. So I'm not even going to say the Return of Swamp Thing is more like the comic, no. but it is more like a comic. It is more like a comic book than the original Swamp Thing film was. So, and who was Jim Wynorski, I believe, was the director of Return of Swamp Thing. He also did Transylvania Twist in 1989, which will probably come up in our comedy section. He got Dick Durock back, and Dick Durock, he also played Swamp Thing in the series. And these were three things that were really essentially all unconnected from one another. It'd be like if Michael Keaton had played Batman 3 different times, but it was never the same Batman.
I mean, the thing is, Dick Durock, even the costume, though, from the series is very similar to Return of Something. Aesthetically, it's very similar. It's almost like the same costume. I will actually go on record saying I think the television series was great, highly underrated. It went a little bit more into the territory of the Alan Moore comics than the movies ever did. I need to rewatch it. I remember when they aired on USA being a huge fan and being like, wow, this is a good, cool show, but nobody gave a rat's ass. So, I mean, even though it's Dick Durock, same costume, it's called Swamp Thing, it's like retelling the story, and it's but the TV series is good. But
yeah, it's all been pretty fun.
I'm also a fan of the cartoon and the action figures, but that's a whole separate thing we won't go into.
I think I had one of I definitely had a Swamp Thing. I didn't get the whole line, but I got a Swamp Thing. I was always a big fan of Bernie Wrightson, the artist Bernie Wrightson. And in fact, Bernie Wrightson's so amazing. My mother, who hates anything that's blood and guts, ended up really getting into Bernie Wrightson too. So
as you should. He was a genius. Rest in peace, Bernie Wrightson. He's literally a fucking genius.
Absolutely. If you don't mind, I'm going to switch rails for a second here because this is supposed to be action and thriller, and we haven't discussed any thrillers yet, unless you're actually going to be insistent that something like Batman is a thriller.
Which I'm not.
But I was going to ask if you had ever seen the film Hider in the House.
Honestly, doesn't sound familiar. That didn't even come up in my research.
Let me tell you a little bit about the storyline. Yes. Okay, here's Hider in the House. Imagine you and your new family are moving into a nice house in a new neighborhood, and everything's just going hunky-dory, but unbeknownst to you, before you bought the house, a convict with mental problems snuck into the empty house and built a false wall in the attic and is not only living on the other side of that wall in the attic, but is connected to your intercom system in the house so that he can eavesdrop on every conversation that you have with your family, every argument you have with your family. And now he wants to be a part of your family and is starting to become friends with your children and sneak down and watch you while you're sleeping. Now imagine that this maniac is Gary Busey and you have Hider in the house.
That's right. I've never seen this. I've seen it come up before, and it was released by Vestron, so I can even see the VHS cover. But no, I've never seen this. It's one of those films or one of those movies that's like, oh, I need to check that. I don't even know if it's ever actually had a proper release as far as like a DVD or Blu-ray release. But
I don't.
I'm assuming you've actually. No, I don't think I get. Because I've seen it come up. Vestron's, they're re-releasing everything, but that's not a title. And you think like something like Gary Busey, even like has Eye of the Tiger gotten an actual release? I actually think it's getting a release.
It's coming soon. Yes, it's coming very soon. I think by Kino Lorber.
Shout Factory did put it out on like Exterminator 2, Alienator, and then Eye of the Tiger got it was like on a one release on a DVD, but 3 films on one DVD. But anyways, but yeah, Gary Busey, Hider in the House, very interesting. I'm assuming you've seen it then.
I have seen it, and it is streaming. I can't remember if I had to rent it or not, but I have seen. I watched it for this, and it was at the very beginning of our 1989 process before we even decided to split it into 3. So yeah, I can't remember that far back, frankly. I know I streamed it, but I couldn't direct people on where to find it. But it's a fun little movie. It does have some tension. And I'll say this is one of the movies that was made when Busey actually still had some chops.
Some gravitas, yeah.
Well, this was the last movie he made before his motorcycle accident. He walked off the set of this and he had his accident like 3 days later.
Oh, wow. Damn, I didn't know that. Crazy.
So, yeah, he still had his role in Point Break up his sleeve and Predator 2. But this was kind of the last hurrah in terms of him playing a major, one of the 2 leads. What's also interesting about it, though, is the family. Whoever casted this, I don't know if they're an idiot or if this was absolutely genius, because I would never put these 3 people in a movie together. But you've got Busey as the maniac, and then the couple that live in the house are Mimi Rogers and Michael McKean. So
that's right, Michael McKean.
So a rare non-comic performance by McKean, where he plays. He's supposed to be kind of the picture-perfect husband until Gary Busey starts to investigate him and find out what's really going on. And from there, I think you can imagine where this plot goes.
Yes.
No reason to dwell on this movie too much, but I would really feel bad if we didn't mention it because, God, Busey makes one last good movie before his accident and then no one brings it up. I have to be there for Busey.
I mean, this is the kind of thing that kind of like this point in late 80s, early 90s, there's a lot of weird, interesting thrillers. And a lot of them I've caught up on recently that I didn't see at the time. But yeah, I need to check it out. I mean, Gary Busey, Michael McKean, weird ass concept. I'm about it. I need to check it out. And then late 80s or early 90s thrillers are just a weird thing for me at the moment. So I'll definitely check it out.
It's worth checking out. Another one that was new to me, but that I had always heard the title of. There's so many of those.
Yeah.
Have you seen the thriller Dead Calm?
I have.
With Nicole Kidman, I think she was 19 years old when she did it, and Sam Neill, who I know is your favorite, and Billy Zane.
Yes, on the boat, yes.
Now, that was a crazy movie. That one I would recommend to anybody, not just, Hider in the House is good for Busey fans, but Dead Calm is really an underappreciated thriller for anybody who is into such things. It's very tight. It all takes place on a boat, or really two boats if you want to get down to it. Sam Neill and Nicole Kidman are married, and he's in the Navy, so he knows his way around an ocean. They're taking a trip because they just lost their child. It was actually a really horrible thing. They lost their child to a horrible accident that happens off screen. The idea is that they're trying to take a break before they get on with their life, and they're going to take this break at sea. So they're on this big kind of sailboat. It's not quite a yacht, but it's rather large. And they come across a distressed yacht in the middle of the ocean. Doing the right thing, they go to check out to see if there's anybody surviving. And the only survivor is Billy Zane. And I don't think I have to tell you folks, if you ever get anywhere and the only survivor was Billy Zane, run as fast as you can the other direction, because Billy Zane has never been up to any good in any of his movies.
No. Not even in the Phantom.
Yeah, but he's fantastic. It's because he's so good at it, because he's so menacing. What ends up happening is Sam Neill gets trapped on Billy Zane's sinking boat with the bodies of the crew that he's murdered. And Billy Zane is on the boat with young Nicole Kidman, but he's not threatening her like a hostage situation. He's got cabin fever or whatever, where he's fine for several hours, and then suddenly he starts to get paranoid that they're coming after him. And so, of course, by the time they're actually coming after him, and he's got a reason to be paranoid about the people on this boat with him, that just dials it up to 11. But it's really well directed, very tightly directed, hard to direct anything on water. And they did this almost 100% on water, oftentimes underwater. Sam Neill has a part where the water is rising on the sinking boat, and he has to spends seriously a quarter of the movie submerged underwater trying to figure out a way to breathe, trapped in this boat so that he can get out to go save his wife, who's somewhere else along the ocean that he doesn't even know. So it's pretty intense. Part of why I wanted to bring it up too is because it was directed by an Australian named
Patrick Royce.
It's Noyce. Like I hear his name Noyce, and I hear it like Noyce. Like, yeah, exactly, because he's Australian. That's Noyce.
Noyce. Yeah.
Philip Noyce, I think it is. Am I right?
Let me see. I remember.
Don't even worry about it.
No, yeah, it's back up. So it was filmed by Philip Noyce.
Yep, Philip Noyce. And another thing about this guy, he directed another movie in 1989 that is so unlike Dead Calm that it's insane.
But it's a movie I'm a big fan of. So.
It is a movie you were a big fan of. Do you want to go ahead and take this one? Since I can already tell by that smile, you know what movie I'm talking about.
Yes, I do. So it is the film Blind Fury with my wife's boyfriend, Rutger Hauer. My wife is a big fan of Rutger Hauer, which is why I married her, because she has taste. So yeah, Blind Fury is it's like a action comedy, I guess. I mean,
it takes you a minute to realize it's a comedy though, because at first it plays like a regular standard canon movie type plot.
Yeah.
But you start to realize it's self-aware. It's if a canon movie realized it was a canon movie.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, too, I mean, Rutger Hauer stars is basically like a blind swordsman. So, no, that's not an original concept, and the movie is aware of it. It is inspired, I guess, by Satoshi the Blind Swordsman.
It's literally a remake of like the 20th movie. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I think you're correct. You are correct. I mean, it's literally Rutger Hauer replaces like blind swordsman who's in this, he's a Vietnam veteran who befriends the son of an old war buddy, and he basically hijinks ensue. In the film, like there's all these moments where like he's like about to step in an alligator's mouth, and like this he seems to do a lot of things on accident, but with like this weird like I'm just a dopey blind guy, and then you realize he's a legitimate badass or whatever. But I honestly, and it's got like Randall Tex Cobb, who I'm a giant fan of. I think when Rutger Hauer did comedy, like I think he was really good at it, but I don't think he was never really cast for his. He wasn't known for his comedic ability, but I think he's perfect in this. I think it's like it nails this weird tone, but it does it really well. I think Philip Noyce, as you mentioned earlier, I think the director really did something kind of unique with this movie because, again, in a lot of the films at the time were either over the top. By '89, we had like satirical action films and things that were sort of like over the top and goofy, or it was like you said, the canon, the hard nose, like the hard target style movies were very stylistic action films, and this is sort of this weird amalgamation. But it was dope, and the coolest thing about it is the action sequences were fantastic. All the martial arts stuff, all of the swordsman shit was great. All the action pieces were really great. I don't know if I own this. I actually don't think I own it. I may own it on VHS, but I don't think I own it on anything else. I need to rewatch it. But dude, yeah, I mean, I used to. There was a time where like I was just obsessed with. I would literally watch anything Rutger Hauer. Even going back to Turkish Delight and like his working relationship with, and I'm blanking on his name, RoboCop.
Verhoeven.
Yeah, thank you, Paul Verhoeven. But I'm amazed how amazing he is in Blade Runner and fucking one of the greatest films of its generation, The Hitcher. But he was always like these, like whether he's fucking Roy Batty or if he's in the Hitcher, he's a very fucking Nighthawk. He's always these intense, like he plays a lot of villains. He's a very intense dude. But in this, he was like this he's like this likable blind action ass kicker. And I just was like, I just found the movie so engaging and so like likable. And again, I think it's a movie that at the time nobody gave a rat's ass about outside of like it's maybe diehard fans of action fans. But it's a movie I've started to see a little bit more people finally kind of giving its due. But last thing I will say about it is my mom loved the movie. My mom was a huge fan, so
I can totally see that.
Yeah, so she thought it was a hoot too. So
I think my dad was the one that got me to see it. I think it was one of those ones where he called me in the room and said, "Hey, you should check this out." And I think my immediate reaction was I didn't like it until I started to realize that it was funny and that it was okay to laugh at this.
Yeah, and the thing is, like you said, it is, you definitely, if you watch it now, it's definitely very self-aware, and it doesn't take itself too seriously, but the action sequences are great, and and again, it's got a very like heartwarming-ish story, and like it's a movie I think I still get a lot of pleasure out of. So
it'll make you smile, it'll make you giggle, and then you get to see Randall Tex Cobb take a Darth Maul out the window, and and
that's right.
And you get to see a fight with Sho Kosugi outside of a canon film. So
Sho Kosugi, you should check him out. Sho Kosugi. Actually, I should say that before I said it. Make sure he hasn't passed away recently. I was like, I don't know if maybe his Instagram is run by his son.
2020 was a weird year, man.
I'm gonna say, yeah, but either way, he posts his Instagram stuff. Always posts like really cool photos and film history stuff. But the legendary Sho Kosugi, I can't believe I left him out. But yes, now again, as this always happens on this podcast, now I know I'm going to be watching over the next few days. I'm going to be rewatching some of these movies. But
definitely, and I think I found Blind Fury on Tubi. I'm not sure. It pops up. That's the thing is. That's why like the longest time, like I don't think I've rushed out to buy a copy. And in fact, actually, now I'm saying that I do know I actually own it on DVD. Now that I'm actually saying it, it is on Blu-ray now, though.
It is on Blu-ray.
It's part of that MBD rewind.
The rewind. Yep. In fact, I didn't even know the cover. The thing I was going to say though is the reason again is it seems to always be streaming somewhere. It's one of those like low budget action films of that period that just sort of bounces around from one streaming service to another, like a Bloodsport or another movie we'll talk about in a second. But either way, but yes, absolutely.
Now that we've gotten one of the bigger sort of just hardcore action movies down, are there any others that pop into your head as particular favorites
of action films of '89? Oh well, I mean, I was just talking about one of them. So yeah, let me just talk about Kickboxer. If you listen to this podcast by now, if you're a regular listener, I have a soft spot for Jean-Claude Van Damme films. And one of the reasons is by 1989, the Dupes is putting out the best of America. In fact, probably, I do think that by 89, Jean-Claude Van Damme's success with what he was doing in the United States for American action films really did influence what Hong Kong was starting to do, and actually sort of helped kind of reinvigorate that second era, basically the Hong Kong, Renaissance the Hong Kong action film renaissance that was basically taking place by 89, 88, and 89, and into throughout the 90s with what Jackie Chan was doing. But like, I think, but either way, let's talk about Kickboxer. So I think for a lot of Jean-Claude Van Damme fans, there's like sort of like the two films that sort of hold up side by side are Bloodsport, and maybe to a slightly lesser degree, but I think pretty much equally was Kickboxer. They're not breaking any new ground. They're not doing anything new. But for what they did, they're just badass. And like, I do think like, while Bloodsport is probably the more fun film, I do think, you know, what takes place, I think Kickboxer makes up for maybe what it doesn't have an overall fun that Bloodsport has. It makes up for in more of like actual action film qualities. I mean, there's all sorts of like heavier topics in this. And then the last fight between, you know, Jean-Claude Van Damme's character and Tong Po, who's the Muay Thai monster villain in it. That end sequence is so fucking influential. What they did with like the wrapping the hands with the rope and the broken glass, the honey and broken glass, and all these. I mean, that stuff has gone on to basically be ripped off a million times by 1,000 different other pop culture properties. But anyways, you know, if you've seen it, most people, you know, if you consider yourself an action fan, you've probably seen Kickboxer. Like I said, only slightly overshadowed maybe by Bloodsport, but great action sequences. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this was the film that Jean-Claude did all of the fight choreography for, and it shows. It definitely played up to his strengths. The fights are very dynamic, very cinematic. Not the most realistic. We'll just say they're very badass. He also did, in the same year, Cyborg, which is an interesting film of itself, a movie I actually really do love. Not held in the same esteem. But anyways, I don't know if I didn't want to. Do you have anything to say about Kickboxer, Devin?
I mostly wanted to hear you talk about it because I've confessed before that Jean-Claude Van Damme kind of escaped me at the height of his fame. I became a fan at the JCVD stage when he became a little more self-aware and took the straw out of his nose. And now I look back on all those movies and I love them. I even love Cyborg. As awful as Cyborg is. And Cyborg, my God, I feel like they just took 10 different scripts and just randomly cut and pasted them together.
Which is pretty much what they did.
Yeah. But I still have an affection for it. And it's just a real appreciation for what JCVD was doing back then. I don't know. I see it with new eyes now. And none of it do I really call good. But I get the fun of it now, I think, is the only way I can really put it.
I will go on record as saying, first of all, I'll disagree with you. I do think they are good, but that's, I won't fight you on that. But to me, they're amazing. But I will also say, Devin, I think you may know this, but to this day, I can do practically perfect the Jean-Claude Van Damme dance. I've done it at every single party I've ever attended. I've been forced to do it.
I've seen it. If this was a video podcast, you'd be doing it right now.
I would be doing it. But yeah, I think for that reason alone, it's I think the movie's almost at this point now become, at a time when, let me just also say, not saying I'm some sort of pop culture genius, but
I'll say that.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. I will say it, but I want to appear modest. But anyways, that dance sequence was huge in my household, but wasn't a well-known, like, I would do it and people like, when they would see me or my twin brother Joe, who also knows the dance, we do it for people, and then they go, "Oh, I remember that sequence," but it wasn't like a well-known thing. Now it's become, thanks to the internet. Now it's like,
it's a meme.
Talk about the JCVD dance. Exactly, it's been memeified.
When we get a Patreon someday, spoiler alert for anyone, if we ever get this up and running with a Patreon, I think maybe the highest tier, one of the rewards, should be a video of you doing the Jean-Claude Van Damme dance.
I'll do a personalized video for you.
And if you give even more than that, we will pay to fly your twin brother in, and you two will act out what the hell was it called? The double impact. You two will act out double impact, because I know you've got the dialogue in your head.
I don't not have the dialogue. But real quick, I do want to talk about Cyborg real quick, just because it is very interesting. I mean, I actually think I don't know the actor's name. But the guy who plays the villain in Cyborg, I think, is fucking great. He's genuinely really creepy and has a really interesting screen charisma. Not a fantastic actor, but very unique look, amazing voice. And like I said, I do think he had a very intense on-screen charisma. But what's most interesting and has now become, I think, pretty well known, but wasn't, at least not growing up for me, that Cyborg started off as Masters of the Universe 2. So its origin was literally Canon wanted to cash in on the Masters of the Universe property. That didn't end up happening. They sold the script around, ended up turning it into a Jean-Claude Van Damme vehicle. Again, the route it got there, I still don't fully understand how it went from Masters of the Universe to what it is now. But it's still, like I said, it was a Cyborg for me is most notable, though, because it was on U.S.A. all the time. Weekends, Saturdays or Sundays on the U.S.A. network, chances are you were going to watch this movie
Cyborg.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it wasn't just Masters of the Universe either. Apparently, some of the sets and costumes were from the failed Spider-Man movie that Canon was putting together.
That's correct, and a million other post-apocalyptic films. Like it was, but yes, you are correct. It was also attached to another Canon failure, which was the Canon Spider-Man film. Oh, what a weird history old Golden Globus has given us. But
there was another one that it wasn't a Canon and it wasn't a Van Damme. But in 1989, you were going to find it on the same shelf next to Kickboxer on the new release in the martial arts section. And I have no idea what you think of this one. What are your thoughts on Best of the Best with Eric Roberts?
Eric Roberts and Ree. I'm blanking on his name. Philip Ree, because Philip Ree was actually, I think he actually was the guy, like he wrote it, or I think it was like his idea. There's like 400 Best of the Best films. It's not good. Especially like, even because they got a bunch of actors. I think it was the case. Well, at least fucking Eric Roberts can't. He's not a martial artist, but he was the actual actor. I think doesn't it have James Earl Jones in it?
He's the coach, and he does absolutely nothing.
Nothing. Yeah, exactly.
He's standing there watching them all work out. He clearly doesn't know martial arts himself, and I started to feel like, what is this? Kickboxer meets the Bad News Bears? It's really what this feels like. And the whole time, Chris Penn is trying desperately to out celebrity sibling Eric Roberts.
That's right. Exactly. 100,000% more. But
I never got past the first one. I'll be honest. In fact, I'm not entirely sure I know how the first one ends.
I was definitely a action film snob, even as a teenager. So if I saw bad martial arts in a martial art movie, I would be immediately turned off. And even Philip Ree wasn't, he was no fucking Jet Li. And it's almost funnier to talk about Best of the Best than, more enjoyable to talk about it than to actually watch them. But I mean,
it's absolutely true.
Yeah, but as an actual film, it's pretty plodding. The whole like martial arts tournament thing, like it was done so much better in a million fucking other movies that it's so weird that this movie went on to become like a franchise. But then again, so did No Retreat, No Surrender, which I love, but also weird that movie got as many sequels as it did. And then The Kickboxer got 30 sequels. That's the best. Is maybe I'll rewatch it soon and try to rewatch it with like a new set of eyes, but not the most fun film franchise, and not even a great martial arts movie, which is really what I'm going to fucking judge it on.
And not even a fun Eric Roberts performance.
No, not even. Exactly. And he's so exactly. Usually, at least, even though Eric Roberts never been a phenomenal actor, he at least has charisma. He has presence.
I think he could have been phenomenal. I think he kind of put it up his nose.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, he phones the fucking. He just so one note in it. Not a highlight of '89. I will say that.
If you like your martial arts a little bit more down home and dusty, maybe you have some thoughts on Roadhouse.
I came to the conclusion last year. I've never met anybody that doesn't like Roadhouse. I think Roadhouse is just one of those movies. It's just like you immediately get it for what it is.
You're kind of mean-spirited if you don't like Roadhouse. I think.
Yeah, exactly. It's a movie that doesn't make a lick of sense.
There's no story. There's no story at all, unless you really want to know the hard truth about the bouncer profession. Is there such a thing as a professional bouncer outside of this movie?
Exactly. For years I spent, is this movie actually like really realistic, or is this like just made of bullshit? I think it's just so likable. First off, I mean, at this point, rest in peace. Patrick Swayze was a star then, but I think now post his death, people sort of have even a higher, it's almost like, oh, poor Patrick Swayze that, died relatively young. And
it is a shame. He was underrated even at his peak, but a lot of that was just some of the choices he made.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, even his death, even like his whole thing with his own death, refusing to quit smoking, even though has lung. Anyways, the whole thing. But this movie it plays to all of his strengths, his sex symbolness, his limber. Patrick Swayze was not a martial artist, but he was a trained dancer, and he was able to sort of take the physicality of his dancing into like this fake martial arts he does. But it's just so like, first off, best thing about the movie, hands down, is how badass Sam Elliott is in this movie.
Yeah.
To this day, I want to look like Sam Elliott I think if somebody goes, what is the coolest looking dude in your head? Immediately I get a picture of fucking Sam Elliott in this movie with his like shoulder length gray hair and beard. And he's just like, he's constantly moving his hair. I don't know, he's just bad motherfucker.
This is before his mustache ate the rest of his beard.
Exactly. He's just what a cool looking dude. But the movie's so likable. All the it's got like pretty ladies. All the ladies in the movie are fantastic. I mean, his love interest in it, I'm blanking on that actress's name. Kelly Lynch, the lady who plays Denise, is Ben Gazzara as the villain is.
Dude, I
can't even.
I love Ben Gazzara. Okay, like the stuff he did with Cassavetes was gut wrenching and heartbreaking, and even he did some great work with Otto Preminger. Ben Gazzara deserves to be in the upper echelon, like people need to talk about Ben Gazzara in the same sort of tone that they use for De Niro, except for Roadhouse, where he's just fucking awful, but absolutely enjoyable to watch. I don't understand his bad guy. I'm the rich guy in town, so everybody does what I say, you hear? And then the whole town's scared of him.
And then this thing is, he's also like kicking ass. He wears like an ascot at one point, but he's still like kicking ass. Like it makes these like punching dudes out. It makes no goddamn sense. But it's great. He's so over the top and such a cartoon.
I'll teach you to be the bouncer in the town bar, exactly. Patrick Swayze. Like we don't take too nicely to bouncers around here.
Dude, even the sequence when he's like driving down the road in his convertible, singing fucking Dean Martin, and just sort of like swerving across the road. It's just such a stupid. The scene makes no sense, but you just buy it because
I forgot about the swerving.
Yeah, it's so insane.
He's just trying to prove that he's the top shit in town by driving in a weaving line down the highway. There's no purpose to it. I think he got in the car that day saying, I'm going to go swerve down the road.
Because I don't give a fuck. I own all this shit. Yeah, it's literally just to say he's an asshole. But first off, you've got John Doe in a small role from the band, the legendary punk rock icon. John Doe from the band X is in a small role.
Yeah.
You got Terry Funk, legend of Texas, the Texan legend. Terry Funk is in this movie, which it's his second role as a heavy in a 80s action film, this and Over the Top, both times. Perfect. Yeah, movies makes no goddamn lick of sense, but it's so fun. The action sequence is fun. The fucking soundtrack, which is all this like white boy blues rock, and like it's just so enjoyable and so dumb. It's a movie you can just turn your fucking brain off and just accept its logic. It's got like so many great lines, like I thought you'd been bigger, and like pain don't hurt, and it's got all these like. It's exactly what I think of when I think of just like escapist films. Just turn your brain off and watch a movie. But
well, the original cut of it was 3.5 hours long. Right? That was exactly
Gone with the Wind.
Apparently, Sam Elliott's character, there was a lot more backstory to him. He's gone on record as saying most of his stuff was cut, and he's in the movie a fair amount. You've also got Keith David as a bartender in the background, and he was certainly at that point in his career more than a bit player. So my guess is that he's somewhere in that 3.5 hour block. Ben Gazzara's acting might be in that 3.5 hour block. I want to call. We need a Snyder cut of Roadhouse.
Right? I will sign that petition. Let's get it on to moveon.org or whatever the fucking petition place is.
And Stephen Colbert claims that he auditioned for a role in Roadhouse, but he has no idea what the role was. But it was one of his first things when he got to Hollywood was he tried out for Roadhouse. I can't imagine where Stephen Colbert would fit into any of that. There was a 2003 off-Broadway play version of Roadhouse, and I'm only mentioning because it had the longest title of any off-Broadway play that's ever had any level of success. The name of the play was Roadhouse, the stage version of the cinema classic that starred Patrick Swayze, except this one stars Tamac from the 1980s cult classic The Last Dragon wearing a blonde mullet wig. That's the title of the play.
I think when you said there's a play, I was like, oh yeah, I was actually thinking of there's a play version. It's actually still around, but there's a play version of Point Break, but they literally cast Johnny Utah, the River Phoenix, or the Keanu Reeves out of anybody who's in the audience. So literally, if you go see a show, you might be playing Johnny Utah in tonight's performance of Point Break.
I love Off-Broadway.
I know, but it's amazing. But yes, I will say again, another movie my mom loved. In fact, this is one of her all-time favorites. She was a huge Patrick Swayze. She thought Patrick Swayze was the bee's knees. You know, my mom was a dancer, and I love. God, I should not be on a podcast where I have to remember things because my brain is just gone. Nobody puts baby in the corner. Anyways,
Dirty Dancing.
Dirty Dancing. Thank you. So she loved that, but she equally loved Point Break. Those were she loved them both, and so. Once again, another movie my mom loved was really so it was in my house all the time. Of course, I always had to look away when the boobs were on, but I
quote unquote look away. Yeah,
exactly. Between that fingers. Not the only Patrick Swayze movie of 1989. I probably saw Next of Kin when it came out or when it was at the time. I couldn't tell you anything about it, but Next of Kin was another Patrick Swayze movie of 1989. I don't know if you've seen it. I have not seen it, or at least I don't recollect.
I have seen it, and I'm probably going to get a roundhouse to the face for this, but I actually think that it's the better movie. It's better.
Oh, I'm sure it's
way better than Roadhouse. Look, Roadhouse is going to be your best pick for a midnight movie, but if you actually kind of want to see a bit of a underappreciated gem, check out Next of Kin with Patrick Swayze and Liam Neeson doing his best Southern accent, and he's actually pretty passable. You certainly wouldn't think he was from Europe if you didn't know who Liam Neeson was in 1989. This was pre-Darkman and, of course, very pre-Oscar Schindler.
But post-Krull, so that's important.
Post-Krull, yes. Well, to me, the whole world is based on pre-Krull and post-Krull.
Exactly. It's like AD and, before Christ, after Christ.
But it's got some really good performances. It's got some tense scenes. It's fairly pedestrian for its time, which means that it's actually pretty good for now, because it's another one of those movies that nobody makes anymore, but I'd probably find 10 just like it's streaming from last year.
Yeah.
There's no real reason to go too in-depth on Next of Kin. I will say that I'm willing to bet that the pitch in the executive office was, imagine the Hatfields versus the Corleones. And that's Next of Kin. It's the down-home mountain family versus the Chicago Mafia.
I honestly, without even really looking at it, I just assumed it was sort of a Hatfield and McCoy thing, literally based off of the title. And
it is if the McCoys are the Mafia. Sort of in that
yeah. Okay, interesting. Okay, cool. I like that. I like that analogy. So
Roadhouse isn't the only beloved big dumb comedy of the year. That actually deserves its praise as the big dumb comedy action comedy that it is. And I know you're a fan of not just this film, but both of its actors. Tango Cash came out in 1989.
I have the poster on my sliding glass door over there. Yeah, I mean, what can you say? It's probably a film I've watched. There's Goonies. There's a few movies that I've probably seen because of just my childhood. And then without an exaggeration, 200-300 times in my life. I mean, literally, it was almost something we'd watched every day. And for me and my twin brother, Tango Cash was sort of the end all be all. I mean, you got fucking Stallone in a sort of weirdly self-aware. I mean, you have the line Rambo's a pussy, which is itself. But, instead of being, in this, he's the tough guy cop, but he's also he wears suits and he's supposed to be really smart. And he plays the stock market. So
you can tell he's smart because he wears glasses in this
glasses, exactly. And he yells at his fucking stockbroker. Okay, let me also go on record to say, first off, the movie is amazing. It's dumb as fuck, but it's genius also. It has some of the most cheesy, eye-rolling dialogue in film history comes from this movie. It's fucking Kurt Russell and fucking Sylvester Stallone co-team headlining a movie, which is, right then and there, you're going to get your money's worth right there. But as they continue to sort of fucking try to out cool and out badass each other, the dialogue is so cringy. It was cringy even in 89. It's so fucking great. But I still remember seeing Terry Hatcher come out for the first time. It was an awakening in me. I had never, there's been pretty girls in films, obviously, but I felt I was Terry Hatcher's the most perfect looking woman on earth to me. But it's so stupid, so over the top. First off, you've got Jack Palance in his most Jack Palance-y fucking performance of all time. It's dripping with Palance-ness. It's just, God, I'm rambling, but the movie, it's literally, it's a staple of my life. It's something, I probably reference that movie once every month at least. It's just so perfect. The dialogue is great. It's got Robert Zadar, who's one of my idols, one of my heroes. That was the first time I ever saw Robert Zadar and his incredible face. Anyway, I'm rambling, but the movie, it's because I shouldn't be, I'm too close to this movie. But yeah, it's perfect. It's weird. There's a lot of weird racism in it.
There's a lot of weird racism all throughout 1989 action. In fact, that's something I'm going to get to on the next thing. But
okay,
I'm glad that you mentioned Jack Palance. We do need to figure out the right adjective. It's Palance-nificent.
I like it. I'll go with that one.
You've got Jack Palance, Robert Zadar, Brian James, and James Hong all in the same movie. I feel like the director, honestly, I think he was looking at the script and I think he said, "Give me the guy who always plays the bad guy." And when they said which one, he said all of them.
Exactly. First off, Devin, you cannot say Brian James without his full title, which is the pride of Redlands, California. Brian James. As two Redlands people, we have to give homage to the legend that is Brian James.
Our hometown boy, yes.
That's the most hysterical and accurate statement of all. Literally, I could not have said it better. Literally, the quintessential movie villains all throughout it, and Brian James in his terrible British accent. That's
which is how he got his part bigger, by the way. Stallone liked his Cockney accent so much that he said, "I want Brian James in this movie more." And his accent's
what the
horrible.
Fuck?
Come on, Slide. Those glasses are supposed to make you smart.
As a 12-year-old kid, I remember thinking that's the worst English accent. That dude is so fake. I was like, is he Australian? I can't think what this is. It's terrible, but I love it. It's great. Everybody's great in it. The souped up killer RV or like a SUV. I wonder what they would have called it at the time. But they didn't call it an SUV.
It wasn't an SUV. They might. I think they did. I think they even stole jokes from Stripes about it being like the highly lethal recreational vehicle or something like that.
My favorite line, though, because it's just, "Who holds the pink slip, Satan?" I was like, oh, God.
Well, they were getting so quippy on that shit that they were doing quips on quips. It was almost like they couldn't decide what was the better line. Right. And so they just have Stallone say two lines, "Thanks for dropping in." And then it would be, "See you next fall." Like, not on the next guy, like literally right after two consecutive lines of dialogue. Here's
one thing about the movie that's always bothered me. Really weird. It's when, spoiler alert, Tango and Cash are framed and sent to prison. There's a scene where they're in the shower trying to talk to each other, trying to get the scope of the land. And they're kind of making fun of each other as they do throughout the whole movie. And Kurt Russell calls Sylvester Stallone Pee-wee. And then Sylvester Stallone calls Kurt Russell tripod, which is like, one is not the other. One is saying you have a small dick. The other one is saying you have a giant dick. I don't know if you think that's an insult there, Sly, but that's a really weird line to say. I always thought that was a very odd choice of thing. Even though, like I said, as a 12-year-old, I'm like, isn't a tripod supposed to mean you got a big dick?
Are you questioning the guy with glasses, James? Can't you tell how smart he is? He has a stockbroker.
He's got a stockbroker. Anyway. But it's genius. It's a movie I love to death. And like I said, literally the poster is on my wall over there. But I think at the time, we as fans, especially by 89, I think everybody in the world wanted to see, what if Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger were in this film together? Or what if this actually, this was the closest we ever got to having two superstar legendary action film kind of guys with Stallone and Kurt Russell in the film together. And it's literally just the biggest, it was basically like it was just like a dick measuring contest, almost literally through the whole fucking movie. It's just un-PC. There's a lot of but it's a ton of fun. It's just turn off your brain, stupid fun.
Absolutely. And speaking of turn off your brain, because I think this movie, I will go out on a limb and say that Tango and Cash is self-aware and is actually a legitimately good movie that's just maybe not as self-aware as Stallone thought it was.
Yeah.
But there was another movie. It was a very independent movie that I only discovered recently. And I think the whole world just kind of discovered this recently, but it is a buddy movie. And that is Action U.S.A.
That's right. Yeah. Which I'm glad that you finally got to watch.
Thanks to Casey. That's what our buddy Casey got me for my birthday. So shout out to Casey. Thanks for gifting me this lovely wheel of cheese.
I will say it's the fact that it wasn't well known. It wasn't a movie that people talked about, sort of this lost classic. Somebody made it famous. They found a cut of it. they showed it live and it started getting some attention. And then I still remember when you could watch it all online. I don't know if it was on YouTube. I forget where I saw it, or Daily Motion, but I saw it in a rough cut of it online. And then finally it got released. In fact, it's getting released like twice. Like,
yeah, Vinegar Syndrome had it, and somebody else has their transfer and is going to release it again.
I got the Vinegar Syndrome, and it's beautiful. I mean, the film looks amazing.
It really does.
Shot in Texas, so it's basically why don't you talk about it, Devin?
Oh, geez, what do you say about Action USA? It's indie enough to kind of feel like an exploitation movie. I mean, it was certainly made for the drive-ins.
Yeah.
My take on it is seriously like what H.G. Lewis was to gore and what Russ Meyer was to sexploitation. This director, Jon Stewart, seemed to create stunt exploitation. This was right. The excessiveness of those other movies matches the excessiveness in the stunts in Action USA. You know, we're both Hal Needham fans. We've seen all the the Burt Reynolds car stunt movies, and there had of course been fighting stunt movies for decades. All martial arts movies are fight stunt movies, but this thing was just all the stunts. I mean, it starts with a car chase that doesn't need to be a car chase because they're just coming home with groceries. And then it turns into another car chase that turns into a helicopter chase in the same chase, and then back to a car chase because the guy they drop off of the helicopter is able to get out and steal someone else's car. It's just wall-to-wall action. And it's very clear that they're doing a buddy cop, like Lethal Weapon inspired thing here, white cop, black cop dynamic, which, I mean, it's just very clear what they were emulating. But they're watching after a witness, a woman who is involved in this car/helicopter/car again chase. She watched her boyfriend, I think, get killed by the bad guys. And so now she's the only one who has the information and they've got to protect her. But the whole time she's like, I can take care of myself. And they're like, yeah, you're doing real good hanging out of that side of that car, you know?
Yeah.
It's just a bunch of people being aggressive towards each other who do not need to be aggressive. And
they're also really inept because she keeps getting walking away from them and almost getting abducted. Like,
yeah, they keep turning around times. Like, where did she go?
Exactly. I'm like, they're the worst. There's a whole sequence where one of the two buddy cops, because it's 1989, so of course it's a white cop and a black cop. Well, they go to a fucking like a shit kicker like country bar, and
which is still there, by the way. That bar still exists, by the way. I found out.
Oh, I believe it.
The bar still exists and looks the same.
I fully believe it. Now is that I didn't live in Texas in '89, so I don't know how accurate that movie is. How apparently openly racist Texas was. But like that whole sequence is actually so uncomfortable because of basically like the black cop. He's a cop too, but he's like basically it's a room full of white shit kicking hillbilly country music fans who basically are like gonna kill him just for being black. But this is a very weird scene. Yeah, I mean is it a great movie? No. Is it a fun movie? Absolutely. And more importantly, is it a interesting movie because of how it was filmed? Basically, like you said, like it's almost like a stunt reel. I will say it's stunt heavy in the first 2/3, and then in the first third, I guess. Then there's like a big lull where there's not a lot of action, but it's still. I mean, the opening sequence is crazy with this crazy ass fucking hot rod car with this insane engine. I'm not a car guy, so I don't know what it is, but it almost looks like a fucking Hot Wheels. It's like this thing isn't real, but the way it's filmed, it's like incredible. All the stunt stuff is amazing. Now, I do have to say, I'm mad at myself because it took me so long to realize that Gregory Scott Cummings, aka Mac's dad from It's Always in Philadelphia, has basically become one of my favorite actors of all time. Just between 88 and 89, he was in this. He was in Cage Fury. He was in fucking Blood Games, which is a fucking really brutal film. He was in Hack-O-Lantern, a movie that I love a lot, and he's very interesting in that movie. But he was in all these weird genre films in between like 88 and 90 that I love, but I only recently sort of realized it was him in all these movies. Some of these movies that I saw for the first time, like Blood Games, I only saw recently with the release of it. But it's a brutal movie. But it's just like, goddamn, like I didn't realize Mac's dad was sort of a B-movie legend. I just always thought of it. But yeah, it's a movie that I definitely feel if you're an action fan, you definitely need to see just because small budget, but directed by basically a stuntman. Yeah, it's a pretty intense little movie. And I'm glad it finally got a release.
It is fun. And Gregory Scott Cummins he's fine in it. I would actually like to see more of his stuff, but the whole time I was watching him, I couldn't shake this feeling that like his average day was going home with his shoulders slumped, popping open a tall one, and telling his girlfriend, well, they gave it to Jan Michael Vincent again.
Totally. That's very. But real quick though, I do have to say, first off, you have one of the greatest voices in cinema history. William Smith is in this movie.
Oh yeah, that's right.
One of the most legitimate badass dudes in Hollywood. Ross Hagen is Drago, the villain in this movie, like the heavy in this movie, and I'm not even gonna say anything about it. Just watch this movie. Oh god, it's so crazy. Anyways, but yeah, it's definitely a fun movie. I don't know the actor William Hubbard Knight. Let me see. He's the guy that plays the his partner. Devin, have you ever seen the movie Samurai Cop?
No, can't say I have.
You need to.
I've seen Sergeant Kabuki Man.
That's another classic. Watch Samurai. We need to talk about Samurai Cop, but this movie and Samurai Cop have a lot in common. So since you haven't seen it, I won't bring it up. But definitely, you should check it out. It's one of the most insanely. If you're talking about like low budget action films, we'll get back to that. We'll have to revisit that at some point. But definitely, you should see. I think it was a movie that became popular. I think whether it was some revival house in L.A. that got Action USA. Sort of made people aware of this movie. They did the same with Samurai Cop, and then Samurai Cop actually the same director and same actor basically did Samurai Cop 2. Robert Zadar. I haven't actually seen the second one. Big fan of the first one. Robert Zadar is actually the bad guy in it, and he's got a beard and he looks really good with a beard. I was like, he should have kept the beard. I thought he was really. Yeah, I thought it really worked for him.
For people Robert Zadar actually had a condition. He's passed away now, but his face kept growing, and so he got a lot of shit in the 80s. Like he was always, in fact, especially in Tango and Cash, they're constantly making comments because he's got this chin that seriously goes out like
basically the bones in his jaw were twice as large as you would normally see in a person, which gave him a very distinct look and was really good in as far as playing the bad guy in movies and stuff. But he played the heroes in a lot of movies. But I thought he looked good with a beard, and I thought he shouldn't have to quote unquote hide his deformity. But again, I thought he looked good with it. I thought he genuinely looked pretty handsome with it. So, but either way, Samurai Cop, check it out. But let's move on because it's it's almost 11 and
we're getting to be about that time again.
I need to talk about one movie though. Like there's plenty. There's some big sequels we haven't talked about yet, but one movie I would just need to say because it needs to be said. It holds place in cinematic history, and that is No Holds Barred. Let me talk about No Holds Barred for a second.
I knew this was going to come up. Yes,
has to come up. It has to. First off, rest in peace, Tommy Tiny Lester, aka Tommy Tiny Zeus Lester, aka million pseudonyms for old Tommy Lister there. This was the movie that really they thought was going to launch the acting career of Hulk Hogan after his legendary role as Thunder Lips in Rocky 3. Anyways, it was basically WWE Films. It's like their first venture into films, and they still make films to this day. But it was Hulk Hogan's big acting debut. They cast some wrestling people in it. There's a lot. I mean, Gene Swenson, the incredible Stan Hansen's in it. But they decided they needed a basically physically intimidating dude that was also an actor. So they cast Tommy Lister. Most people know him as Debo from Friday, who was legitimately 6'5", a big. If you know Debo, if you know Tiny Lister, he's a big scary dude with a
one in a million. Yeah,
1 in a million with a lazy
and supposedly really sweet.
Yeah, nice, super nice guy. Everybody who worked with him said he was really great. But him in real life, him and Hulk Hogan were the exact same height, but they wanted Zeus to be a little bit bigger, just to be a little to so they put him in these legitimately in these Frankenstein shoes, which is really awkward in the movie. But even more awkward because they brought Zeus into the world of wrestling. They literally brought that character into the WWF, as it was called at the time, now it's WWE. But so he actually went from being a movie villain to a real life wrestling villain. Didn't work out too well because he wasn't a wrestler. A lot of talents, I'm sure, but he wasn't coordinated enough to be a wrestler. But then it made his weird Frankenstein shoes even more noticeable when he's doing it live in wrestling. Anyways, the movie is historically bad, but I love it. I unironically love it because I think it's really entertaining, and I think the actual there's some pretty bitchin' action sequences. There's this notorious sequence where basically I can't even laugh thinking about the scene. So basically they try. So do I need to break down this movie? So okay. So Hulk Hogan basically plays the Ripper, he basically plays a version of, he's basically
Hulk playing Hogan. Hulk Hogan. They call him Rip because he rips his shirt. Get it?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But it's instead of wearing red and yellow, he wears blue and white. So
because you got to have some. You got to have some natural talent in there to play different colors.
Yeah, Hulk wanted to play a different character. Exactly, show his range. So this is the plot. This is a real movie plot to a real film that was the legendary Kurt Fuller, he's on a new level in this movie. He always plays like scummy bad guys, like scummy corporate bad guys, but in this it's like over the top. But he basically Kurt Fuller plays the head of the second ran television studio. And the only reason they're getting their ass kicked in ratings is because of how unbelievably popular wrestling is, and specifically because of Rip, because of Hulk Hogan's character. So he's trying to get Rip to come over, quit his contract with the other studio and come over, but Hulk Hogan did not Rip denies. So now Kurt Fuller's trying to get Hulk Hogan to come over, but then he also comes up with his own thing, this whole battle of the tough guys thing, which is when he finds Tommy. But there's a whole sequence where basically they've kind of kidnapped Hulk Hogan and they have him in this fucking limousine, and Hulk Hogan starts kicking the shit out of this limousine from the inside. And anyways, he basically tears apart this thing and then basically starts kicking the ass of all these corporate cronies. And there's a whole sequence when he basically rips this dude out of the limousine, and he's like, "What's that smell?" And then this corporate goon goes, "Dookie," and because he shit his pants. And I can't even, that some grown men wrote this movie is insane.
Hogan and Vince McMahon sat down to write this, and that is who wrote this. Sat down and said, "Yeah, we're going to call it Tournament of the Tough Guys."
Exactly. But everything in this movie was the first thought. There was no editing, revision. What do we call him? Rip. All right, let's go. There was no second guessing in this film. But with that said, I think it's so rewatchable because of how insane it is. And there's so many dumb sequences. First off, one of my favorite moments is so fucking stupid. The lovely Joan Severance plays basically the love interest in it. And nowhere on earth would this lady hook up with this dude. But basically Rip is they go to a fancy French restaurant. And they go to this restaurant, and you think, oh, this guy is so uncouth, and you see Joan Severance's character is what's this big wrestler doing? But meanwhile, he's you basically come to find out that Rip speaks fluent French. He knows the fucking owner. Everybody goes, "Oh, thanks for coming to our restaurant, Rip." And they get the snooty fucking maitre d' who's new there doesn't know that Rip, is the best customer, and so he gets fired. It's the most stupid. The plot wouldn't even make it in a sitcom at the time. It's that bad. With that being said, it's definitely if you're a fan of wrestling, you're a fan of 80s actioners, this movie has it has a special place in history. Is it a good movie? Of course not. It's awful, but it's awful in all the right ways for me. So
very well put, actually. Very well put. I'm convinced that it's an enjoyable movie now. I wasn't so convinced when I was watching it. I mean, I see the fun in it. I will confess, this was one of my first moments trying to act cool with a girl back when this movie came out, and I'm all of 10 years old. I was not a big WWF fan. I became more of a fan through my friends later. You were one of them, but I couldn't care less about Hulk Hogan in 1989. And I was literally about to start talking shit about the movie when the trailer came on TV. And the girl that I liked back then, Danielle goes, "I kind of want to see that." And suddenly I'm like, "Oh yeah, that looks pretty good. Yeah, I want to go see that too." It was,
I love it.
But I have seen it multiple times since, and there really is nothing beats watching Hulk Hogan burst out of the top of a limousine like he just literally defeated the car.
Exactly.
The parked car, I should add. So yeah, no holds barred. Worth seeing if you're a fan of machismo.
Yeah.
Not really worth much else aside from that. Not even Vince McMahon's shining hour.
No, definitely not that. But
I think I think what it took to get that movie written was one hotel room and 2 bottles of tequila. That's
absolutely
my guess.
That's one I guarantee. Now again, I will say I miss it. Like, I had two heroes. In 1989, I had literally two heroes. They were Jean-Claude Van Damme and Hulk Hogan. So 99 was a good year for me, cinema-wise. Now, I will say, saying you're a Hulk Hogan fan in 2021, not as kosher, not as understandable. Not the greatest guy, Hulk Hogan, unfortunately. But, in 1989, he was a real-life superhero. I was like, if somebody told me Hulk Hogan could throw a basketball into the sun, I would have been like, yeah, absolutely. He's going to Hulk up. He's going to fucking get, all the Hulkamaniacs. And then he's going to, I would believe it. I just thought he could.
Of course he can throw a ball into the sun. I've seen him rip his shirt, dude.
Exactly. Clean off his body. Anyway, let's move on.
There's a couple of films that kind of have a little bit of a throughway on them. I guess the first one, I'm going to just go ahead and just briefly acknowledge and then skip over to the next one. I will acknowledge Charles Bronson in Kinjite, The Forbidden Subjects, which was his last movie for Cannon, and it was the last movie ever directed by J. Lee Thompson, who directed some of Bronson's Death Wish films and more than half, I think, of his Cannon films. God bless him. His best work was done in the 60s with like Guns of Navarone and Cape Fear. And he did a couple of the better Planet of the Apes movies as well. But in 89, they made Kinjite together, in which Charles Bronson plays a racist going up against the Yakuza, trying to bust up a child porn ring a child sex slavery ring. It's just one of those things. I can't even recommend it. I mean, as fun as Charles Bronson can be in some of those later movies and being cantankerous and whatever, sometimes I really get the idea that these guys didn't know exactly how to show that child pornography was a bad thing. Like it can make you feel really uncomfortable because, they're going to say that they were showing you the explicit horror of it. And I'm pretty sure that's not really what they were going for. But I will give it a mention because I love Charles Bronson so much and because I love J. Lee Thompson. So to skip right over that and head to the other racist Japanese action movie of 1989, Black Rain, directed by Ridley Scott and starring Michael Douglas. And people love this movie and I can't stand it. I don't know. What do you think of Black Rain? Have you seen Black Rain?
I kept seeing that title pop up. Yeah, I don't think I've seen Black Rain. Even honestly, the cover art does nothing for me. And I like Michael Douglas, but I've never bought Michael Douglas as like some ass kicker.
Yeah, I think that's really where it goes wrong. Douglas can be great. And this was only a couple of years after Wall Street. So he was still kicking ass and like at the height of his acting fame. I would say the height of his professional fame was honestly probably being the producer on One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But in terms of his acting, he was really at the top. And he took this movie with Ridley Scott. I will say Ridley Scott, I am so hot and cold with him. He's directed some of my favorite movies of all time. And then at the same time, he's directed some of the most overrated piles of shit that I've ever seen.
I could not agree more. Yeah.
Like Ridley Scott's best movies are so good. I could never live without owning them on disc. And that being said, Ridley Scott directing something will never make me go to the theater to see a movie. Like never, ever, ever. His movies are either really amazing or terrible or boring. The possibility that a new Ridley Scott movie might be in the upper third is, and you know what? And people tend to disagree with me with the ones I like too. Like I love Matchstick Men.
Matchstick Men's great.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Blade Runner is obviously great. Alien is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah. I think the Alien franchise is exactly. Yes, he directed Alien, but he also directed fucking Prometheus and Alien Covenant. So
yeah. So he can't really own that anymore in the same way. I think James Cameron owns that series anyways, even though I prefer the first one to the second one. I think the second one was more impactful in its time anyways. Yeah. I think the first one in the long run is showing itself
and I will say this,
but
Aliens is definitely better than any movie that came after it. So regardless if it was Ridley Scott directed or not. So,
but yes, in 1989, Ridley Scott gave us Black Rain. It starts, the first scene is Michael Douglas racing in a motorcycle. And I am literally looking at Michael Douglas racing a motorcycle and saying out loud, Michael Douglas doesn't know how to drive a motorcycle. Like I'm seeing the evidence in front of my eyes and we're still refusing to believe it because it's Michael Douglas. Andy Garcia's in it too. He's not bad, but God, I wish you could see it because I just want to rail on how stupid his death scene is. Sorry, spoilers. It's not the end of the movie. It's towards the middle of the movie. It's the most pointless death sequence in an entire movie of the late 80s. It's supposed to turn everything around. It's supposed to be what suddenly makes Michael Douglas's fish out of water American detective in Japan suddenly turn into a badass. And I just don't get it. Kate Capshaw is also in it before she retired from acting. I saw this movie last week and I can't tell you what Kate Capshaw does in the movie. Like, I know she's in it. I recognize her. I'm like, oh, there's Kate Capshaw. I like Kate Capshaw. I have no idea what her purpose is. Like, I don't even know what part she's playing, even though I remember her being in it.
It's got the cast is strong. It's got Ken Takakura, who he's a Japanese legend. So
all of the Japanese actors are great. And you know what? Douglas isn't even bad. It's just not believable.
No,
I think I kind of hate fuck on this movie a little bit more than it deserves because so many people love it. You know how that goes.
Oh yeah.
So I'll give it points on performance for the Japanese side of the cast, but Douglas is playing a racist in the movie. Like, that's part of his character, is that he is racist.
The Japanese.
He hates the Japanese. And now he's having to go off and fight the Yakuza. And it's not just that it doesn't sit right now. It shouldn't have sat right then.
No. Yeah.
And there was an element like in Dirty Harry, when they're talking about how Harry Callahan was a racist, and he's talking to his new Latino partner and he says, "Is it really true you're racist?" And he lists off all of the horrible names that you could call any different race on earth. And then he winks at him. And you know that that's not really how Harry Callahan feels. You know that this is a reputation he puts out there in order to appear tough to the people that he has to go up against. So they think that he's really going to come after them. But with Dirty Harry, it's all a show. With stuff like this, where the main character really is racist, I'm not going to root for that. Look, even Gene Hackman in French Connection, which I love, French Connection 1 and 2, both of them I love. I'm never rooting for Popeye Doyle. I'm fascinated by the story I'm watching, but he's a racist as well. And I'm not rooting for him. I'm watching the movie disconnected to see the story and how well that's played out. That's not a talent that Ridley Scott has that William Friedkin had for that movie.
Absolutely.
All he did was create a racist cop going to fight in the area that's abundantly the people that he's racist against.
It's such a needless, that it's a weird cinematic shorthand for like, this guy's just like, he's like, I don't know. It's like, I don't.
There's a difference between edgy and asshole. And I don't think they figured out the difference in 89 yet.
Yeah, I agree with you with that.
If we're going to keep with Japanese cops though, and an actual good movie that some of our audience may not have seen, an actual Japanese language film called Violent Cop came out in 1989. Was it directed? Yeah, it was directed by Beat Takashi and starring Beat Takashi.
Beat Takashi. Yep.
Have you ever seen that one?
No, in fact, I own it. This cartoonist I love named Ben Mara did the. I remember saying Beat Takashi's a legend. Had never even heard of Violent Cop, but they released it 3 or 4 years ago, and I literally remember because it showed up on this cartoonist I did the cover art, and I was like, oh, Beat Takashi, and then I'm like, oh, it's called Violent Cop. I need to see this. So I ended up buying it. I literally haven't watched it. This was at a time, 89, when most of Asia there was a lot of really good, a lot of films were about either their version of almost like a Dirty Harry of cops who get fired, but they continue trying to do a cop thing, or bring somebody to justice, or corrupt cops, or cops versus Yakuza, or undercover cops in the Yakuza. This was a big thing in both Japan and in China at the time, of basically a hard-boiled cop thriller crime movies and stuff. There's a lot of good ones, but no, I haven't seen Violent Cop. I'll probably end up putting it on tonight or tomorrow just to watch it. But yeah,
the plot is really loose. I mean, it's really more of a performance than a story in a lot of ways. And to anybody that doesn't know Beat Takashi, in his native Japan, he came up as a comedian, and he still is currently a game show host.
That's right.
Yeah. And he's known as being wacky and goofy, hence the name Beat Takashi. His real name is Takashi Kitano. He came from a comedy duo, the Two Beats, and he was Beat Takashi, and I don't know who the other Beat was. I can't remember the name. You can find some of their stuff on YouTube if you're ever curious. His movies, starting with Violent Cop, it was supposed to be a comedy. I don't know what happened. The director got fired or quit or something, and they asked Beat Takashi to take over on making the rest of the movie. And he said, I'm only going to do this if you let me really do it the way I want to, and I don't want to be funny. And so he played it really brutal, but because he's a comedian, it's still very much inspired by, you can tell like the demeanor and his face is all Buster Keaton, and his walk, his movement and his motions is all Charlie Chaplin. Like he walks, he has that wobbly little tramp sort of walk when he's walking around, and he's constantly stony faced, whether he's driving around or beating the shit out of a perp or whatever he's doing, and he's losing his mind. You're watching him lose his mind as the movie goes along. And he never really had all of his marbles to begin with. It's hard to say that it's really a masterpiece of international filmmaking, but it's incredibly interesting. And Beat Takashi has certainly gone on to do things that were even better, and certainly more well-known. But it's got a very sort of Scorsese-ish sort of ending. And it's a mix of all of his influences. And it's fascinating. It's a fascinating watch.
Yeah.
He's much like Jack Nicholson. Takashi has that kind of face that it doesn't matter what else is going on screen. Your eye is going to him. He has it, whatever it is.
Yeah. I think the movie most Westerns probably known from is probably Battle Royale, which is, again, it's a kind of thing of like, it's a very serious movie, but even in his performance, you can tell there's a little like an underlying comedic aspect. He brings a slight weird wry humor to it, but there's definitely a sense of humor. He's not like, say, he's not like a Sonny Chiba or like necessarily like this like genre legend. He's just a very cinematic, like he's just an interesting person. I mean, I don't know if there's a better way to say it, but I hate the word idiosyncratic, but like he's very unique in what he does. Even like I said, even I don't know, I wouldn't even begin to fathom and say I know his comedic stuff or I'm familiar with it, but like even his face, when he's just deadpanning his face, there's a very distinct, he's a very interesting look, even just to his face, is what I'm trying to say. And he's definitely has he's somebody that, I mean, again, I think 89 probably would have been like even the start of his film career, right? By that point. Like,
it may have been his film debut. He was already a star on TV. May have been his first film.
God damn it, now I gotta watch this. I mean, that's the thing, is like every time we do this podcast, it's like I like, oh yeah, either I learn about a movie that I want to see, or I'm like reinvigorated to rewatch a movie I already love. But that's, again, I hope our listeners get as much enjoyment out of this podcast as I do. But
God, I hope so. But I'm gonna keep on doing it.
Exactly. I do want to. We're doing this episodically over a few different podcasts, and this is still running long. But obviously, I'll talk about Karate Kid Part 3 very quickly. It's a movie that gets a lot of hate online, even amongst my own friends, because it had the audacity to, move on from Daniel LaRusso and have a new character, because God damn it, by this point, fucking Daniel LaRusso would have.
I thought LaRusso was, I thought he was the new
Oh, no, I'm sorry. You're right. I'm thinking Karate Kid Part 4. Karate Kid Part 3 is I actually really enjoy it. It's actually introduced, you're right. For some reason, my whole head, I kept thinking it was Part 4, the next Karate Kid. No, Part 3 is actually introduces John Silver, who has actually become sort of the most, it's weird saying the diehard Karate Kid franchise fan base, but there is, especially thanks to Cobra Kai now. Like, obviously, it was a successful film franchise even then. There are people that really die hard into the mythology of the Karate Kid franchise. And John Silver, in the last few years, has become almost like even more than fucking John Kreese, as he's sort of had a little bit of redeem with Johnny Lawrence. But John Silver's become like the preferred bad guy in the film franchise. I actually really like Part 3. I think it's the whole thing with, they build a little fucking, they give basically poor Pat Morita finally got to have something besides just being, the sensei. So he starts his own business, his own, I mean, I guess they're selling bonsai trees, but it's, they're selling out of it's a plant store. One thing I thought was really interesting is that it introduces, and I'm blanking on the name of the actress, but it's every one of these movies, Daniel has to have a new girlfriend. And this, it's like, look, they even say this is, it's like she already has a boyfriend that she's like, they're just friends. So he basically gives her, there's like a platonic friendship between him and a girl, which I thought was, in hindsight's healthy. It's nice to show that men and women can be friends and not be a romantic thing. Anyway, it's a weird thing to get into, but this is the movie that tries to make the franchise be a little bit more mature. It gets a little darker. They show Daniel LaRusso sort of going to the dark side for a little bit. Is it a great movie? No, but I mean, if you like Part 1 and Part 2, right in line. I think I said at the time people hated it. It got really bad. The first Karate Kid was a huge, not only did it make money, but critics liked it. They saw the inherent heart of it and the really three-dimensional characters and stuff. Part 3 did not do well critically or commercially.
Well, remember, the original Karate Kid had John G. Avildsen going for it. I mean,
that's right.
Karate Kid was directed by the director of Rocky. So that...
Which is, I mean, then that's the thing, is it's very much a spiritual... It has the same heart as the Rocky film, the original Rocky film. But, I mean, it didn't do well critically or commercially. But I think in the last few years, the fan base of the Karate Kid films was really sort of embraced as being an equal to the first two. If you're a fan of the show Cobra Kai, they sort of hinted that they'll probably introduce Silver. I keep saying Mike, it's John. I keep calling him John Silver. I think that was a kid I went to high school with. Terry Silver. And then Mike Barnes is the young guy, but Thomas Ian Griffith plays Terry Silver, who's basically like John Kreese's like war buddy, who's like now like a billionaire. He's like a rich karate guy. It's so dumb, but it's actually really fun. Isn't Alvison's kid in the movie?
Oh, I have no idea.
Hold on, let me see. Yeah, it is. So I was like, remember reading that? Yep. So Jonathan Avildsen, John G. Avildsen's son, plays Snake, the sidekick to the bad guy in the nepotism. But yeah, anyways, it's I don't know if you have any distinct feelings on this movie, but it's a movie I actually really enjoyed. I think it's a great entry into the. I think it's a good last movie for Daniel, especially.
I will confess, and I know that I am very not popular in saying this, but I have no distinct feelings about the Karate Kid whatsoever. I never watched part 3. I never watched the next Karate Kid, and I haven't watched Cobra Kai. I'm happy for people who have found it. I can't even explain it. I fully acknowledge that the first movie is a good movie and that the second one is good enough. But for some reason, when I was a kid, I never said no to the movies ever. And my dad took me to go see The Last Starfighter, which is a great movie. And while we're walking out, the poster for Karate Kid's on the wall of the movie theater, and I'm all of 5 years old at this point, and I still wish my dad could take me to the movies every single day, but at this point, at 5 years old, like that's the ultimate. And my dad pointed to the poster of Karate Kid and said, "You want to go see that?" And I looked at it and I looked at him and I went, "Nope."
Well,
I have no idea why, but for whatever reason, just from seeing the poster, I was done with Karate Kid as a kid, having no idea that it was going to become something that everybody at school was talking about once I got to school. That's the reason why I watched it. I'm like, oh, my friends love this movie. Maybe I should check it out, and realize, oh, this isn't so bad, but like, seriously, I'm not going to get into it. Like the stubbornness of kids. And now I feel like I'm missing out on Cobra Kai, but not enough to go back and rewatch anything or start anything new.
I will be first off, I'll be very upfront and say I'm a fan of the franchise, but even I can recognize that, first off, as films, they're 1 degree above a fucking after school special as far as like cinematic quality, as far as like, the messaging. But, and the action is, Daniel Lewis is terrible. He couldn't fight his way out of a paper bag. The movies continually just do what the last one did. I would never argue that they're good movies. And I will definitely argue that Cobra Kai, at least 60% of the appeal is the nostalgia aspect of like seeing the characters as grown-ups and sort of continuing on. So I wouldn't even say you're really missing out. I'm a fan, but I would never try to argue that there's some sort of, I would say the first Karate Kid is definitely a movie, even in what it did to film after, like how many films tried to be it afterwards. I mean, all of the kickboxers and all these things really owe their success to the Karate Kid, and how great Pat Morita was as fucking Mr. Miyagi and stuff. So yeah, the first one's great. I love the second one, but again, maybe just for Peter Cetera's beautiful soundtrack. But anyways, but yeah, Karate Kid 3. I feel like the other one we need to talk about real quick, which I can't believe we haven't already brought up, is Lethal Weapon 2. I mean,
yes,
I know you wanted to talk about it, so let's talk about it.
I don't know that I necessarily wanted to talk about it, but I'll talk about it. I'm a huge Richard Donner fan.
I feel like if you're talking about action films of '89,
we're remiss. But as far as Lethal Weapon 2 goes, I rewatched this movie just because I hadn't seen the first 2 Lethal Weapons in a while. Or actually, I hadn't seen 2 and 3 in a little while. I tend to see Lethal Weapon 1 every couple of years. And for whatever reason, Lethal Weapon 4, when it's on TV, like I never tune to it, but I always seem to catch it. I don't even like part 4, but I've seen it more. The first one is a classic, and one of these days we'll have to do a deep dive on the first one when we're in an appropriate spot to be discussing probably the best action movie of 1987.
One of the most important action films of all time. I mean, it was huge. It wasn't necessarily Die Hard, but it wasn't far off from that. So
yeah, and it was right around the corner from it. I think it was the 1-2 punch of Lethal Weapon and Die Hard happening in 87 and 88 that really took us into the 90s. And Lethal Weapon 2 is a really solid entry in terms of it's fun, it's action-packed. You've got Mel Gibson going full Mo Howard in it. So it has all those things that you remembered, except for it has not aged well. And I'm actually willing to think that the whole series hasn't particularly aged well. And a lot of that is Mel Gibson's fault. Like I will place that squarely at his feet. There's a section in the first half of or even the first half hour of Lethal Weapon 2 where I was looking away from the screen and working on something. And I heard somebody make a joke about the Japanese. And I had to turn around just to make sure it wasn't Mel Gibson making the racist joke. And it was actually Danny Glover, because for some reason in 1989, it was socially acceptable to hate the Japanese because somebody had given out the misconception that all the Japanese wanted to do was buy out America and be deadly serious businessmen or intrusive, annoying tourists with obnoxious cameras. And that was the American idea of Japanese at that time. And
which, real quick, I need to say that I still remember when that was a thing, and that shows the ignorance and the ugliness of fucking. I mean, first off, if your problem with Japanese tourists is this, they take a lot of photos. What an innocuous, harmless. Even you're doing this stereotype for all Japanese people. Well, we're not going to touch about how stupid and awful that is. If that's your problem, is that they do this innocuous thing like they want to take a lot of photos, you're a fucking asshole anyway. We're not even get into the awfulness of racism and fucking bigotry and fucking stereotyping. If that's your biggest problem, you're a dickhead. Also, I just need to address in 2021, especially what's going on now. If you're listening to this podcast and you have if you harbor racist feelings towards Asian people, fucking unsubscribe. Don't listen to this podcast. I hate you. You're a piece of shit. Fucking I don't want you as a fan. Don't listen to this podcast.
Amen.
Exactly. So that just needs to be said.
It did need to be said, and I'm 100% by you on that. Like I said, I had to rewind it to see if it was Mel Gibson because I expected Mel Gibson to date badly, and it was Glover. And so I'm like, okay, so I guess this whole series is dated badly now.
Yes.
And it is a museum piece of an action movie, unlike Die Hard, which is still as fresh as it ever was.
Yeah.
Now, I'll hold off on saying the whole series is that because I would like to go back and see the first one again because I do think that was an important movie.
Yeah.
The second movie, still fun, but really like less irrelevant. It's less relevant to culture by the second.
Plus, the first Lethal Weapon had a really grit and edge to it. I mean, there's a pretty dark underlying theme in that with suicide and mental health disorders and shit. And this one, it starts to really become a cartoon. I will have to say, though, and I think I brought this up on a different podcast, but Lethal Weapon 2 holds this weird distinction for me and this weird place in my life because it made me fucking both obsessed with and infuriated about diplomatic immunity. And the fact that diplomatic immunity was I would stay up at night months after I saw it for the first time thinking about how awful diplomatic immunity is and how I don't understand how this is a thing and just being mad that I thought this was a real problem, that people at diplomatic immunity were just committing heinous, violent crimes across the United States but couldn't be arrested because they had diplomatic. It's a weird thing. Or at the very least, they were,
or at the very least, they were stealing Cougarons.
Like, exactly. Or even, yeah.
I mean, and I will point that out as a positive. Like, I do kind of wish that we could go back to when the stakes were the bad guys are stealing Cougarants. Like
Cougarons, yeah.
Cougarants, however you pronounce it.
I wouldn't even begin to understand how I.
Like, the stakes don't have to be the world, and the stakes don't even have to be Alaska. We said
that's right
about jocks, but yeah, the stakes were low in this, and expectations should be too. If you're rewatching Lethal Weapon 2. I'm actually not looking forward to Lethal Weapon 5. I am looking forward to Indy 5. So I'm not an ageist. I just and I'm not even entirely anti Mel Gibson. I think that people say a lot of things when they're drunk, but I think that he's had time to clear it, and I don't think he's been entirely successful at clearing it. I don't think he's handled himself particularly well. But I get it. I get why people still like him. There are people that I still like just because I like the memories and I don't like the person if they're that big of a fan, but it bothered me too much. And
I fully understand.
So yeah, I'm not going to be in for 5, even though I can't believe Richard Donner says he's going to direct it. And that dude's like 2 days older than God. So to see Richard Donner make his first movie in 20 years, and he's got to be in his late 80s, if not early 90s by now. So that might get my curiosity.
Also, I'm going to go on record here, and I'm probably going to be a very unpopular opinion. The other reason I'm not the biggest fan of part 2, it brought in Joe Pesci, and I find him so annoying. I found him so annoying as a kid, and then trying to rewatch part 2 a few years ago, I was like, yeah, I don't know. It's like he really tried to bring in the whole comedic guy, and there's nothing to do with Joe Pesci's a phenomenal actor, obviously.
Sure.
But his character's so annoying, and it's like it's so transparent that they were trying to I'm not a fan. But anyway.
That character, yeah. And of course, Joe Pesci was about to go on and have his best year ever in 1990. So
exactly.
Between Goodfellas and Home Alone in 1 year. Got it. The same way I want to have Michael J. Fox's 1985, I would like to have Joe Pesci's 1990.
1990, yep. For real.
But yeah, I think that's enough to be said about that particular one. I want to give some quick just name drop shout outs. I personally enjoy Physical Evidence with Burt Reynolds, but most people probably won't. I actually really love Sea of Love with Al Pacino and Ellen Barkin. If we had time to go back and do this over again, I would make sure that one got a little bit more love because let's
revisit it. We can revisit it on our dramas. We'll talk about it.
Sure. Sounds good.
I mean, I will say, I remember seeing Casualties of War, and I liked it, but I remember nobody else liking it, and having revisited, like I said, I understand that Michael J. Fox was trying to not be Marty McFly anymore, but I don't think Casualties of War, I don't know, I need to revisit it, but a very interesting movie. We've already talked about Blue Steel on this podcast already.
Yes, Blue Steel's worthy of mention.
We have talked about
Curtis and Clancy Brown. That's a
should
really
not
good
be
movie.
Fucking.
Yes,
let's just. We've already been on record as saying they should not be fucking. But again, it's an interesting crime thriller kind of film. Glory. Do we need to talk about Glory? Glory is the movie that I'll never forget this. In school, one teacher was like, "Hey guys, we're going to watch a movie today. We're not going to have class," and they showed Glory. Then the same week, we had an assembly, and they're like, "Hey guys, at the end of this assembly, we're all going to watch a movie," and then they showed Glory. So I had to watch it twice in school within a week. And I was like, it made me hate that movie. Obviously, a great movie, fucking phenomenal movie, fucking amazing cast: Denzel Washington, Morgan Freeman, Matthew Broderick.
Yes, Matthew Broderick.
But he's good in it. But yeah, it's a Civil War, a great movie. But just, I don't know, they forced me to watch it in school twice, so then I held a grudge against it for a long time.
I don't think anybody can hold that part against you. But yeah, those are all worthy of the shout outs. Dolph Lundgren had a cool year with The Punisher and Red Scorpion.
Yep. We'll have to come back to Dolph Lundgren movies because I do need to talk about The Punisher, but this is going to ramble on for too long, so we'll come back to it.
Yeah, it was a really phenomenal year. Even I even like Don Johnson in Dead Bang. I don't know if you saw Dead Bang.
I saw it in probably 1990, but I probably haven't seen it since then.
Don Johnson versus neo-Nazis, and there's a whole sequence where he's a drunk cop. And there's a whole sequence where he has to chase a guy down, and he gets so worn out from the chase that once he gets the guy cuffed and down, he ends up vomiting on him. And that ends up being like the cop or the perp ends up like confessing because he's afraid he'll get vomited on again. And I actually really liked, I'd never seen that before, and I still haven't seen it since, but it's totally real. It's totally what would happen if an alcoholic cop had a foot chase across Los Angeles. Yeah, he would end up vomiting on the guy.
I like that. I do have to real quickly mention Lorenzo Lamas' Snake Eater, because it was a weird movie that the name didn't make any sense to me as a kid. And I was like, what is this movie? I thought he was going to be a big star. I was really wrong. I thought Lorenzo Lamas was going to be the next fucking big star. I was wrong. But again, a weird movie that they played on U.S.A. or I remember it being on basic cable a lot. I'm like, what the fuck is Snake Eater? Also Renegades.
Yes. I forgot about Renegades.
The best thing I can say about Renegades is it was a movie and I saw it. That's the best thing I'll say about Renegades.
I'm not even sure that Lou Diamond Phillips
saw it.
Kiefer Sutherland saw it. Yeah. The one that I'm not sure if you saw it or not is Johnny Handsome.
Yes, the
It's a Walter Hill movie with Mickey Rourke. Actually, that movie is like one Willem Dafoe away from being like the perfect 80s cast.
Yeah. I saw it at the time. I haven't probably seen it in 20 plus years. About 10 years ago, my wife kind of discovered Mickey Rourke and that he was so goddamn handsome.
Yeah, about 10 years ago, Mickey Rourke discovered Mickey Rourke.
Rediscovered. Dude, I feel bad. He was such a fucking great actor.
Yeah, this one's particularly fucked up too, because he spends the first half of the movie with prosthetics on his face that are they're not quite right. Rocky Dennis level, but he's called Johnny Handsome because he's super ugly.
Ironic, that's right.
And he's a criminal. He's like the best there is. He ends up getting caught and he's done wrong by his partners, played by Lance Henriksen and Ellen Barkin.
Well, Ellen Barkin, yep, that's right.
Yeah. And so Forrest Whitaker is a prison doctor who offers him a chance to like go through massive reconstructed surgery to come out the other end looking like a completely different person. I guess Forrest Whitaker's hoping that he'll use it to start a new life, but really he's using it to get back at Lance Henriksen and Ellen Barkin because they won't recognize him. This sounds really sad, but I have to say the ugly face they made for Mickey Rourke in the first half of the movie looks remarkably like modern day Mickey Rourke.
I was gonna say
it's shocking, but it's a good movie. It's a good movie in the way
Walter Hill.
Streets of Fire is a good movie. Walter Hill makes movies that feel like they're distinctly made for the psyche of a 12-year-old.
That's right.
There's so many directors where I feel like, what did a 12-year-old make this? And they make bad movies. Somehow Walter Hill makes movies that are for the 12-year-old soul inside of him that seem to work. And this is one of them. This is right up there with Streets of Fire in terms of being a complete style over substance sort of thing. And it got passed by a lot of directors. Al Pacino wanted to play the lead role at one point, but he couldn't get past the fact that it was such a B movie plot, and they kept on wanting to make it more serious. And what's my motivation? I'm going through this whole transition. And Walter Hill said, fuck this. I'm getting Mickey Rourke. Mickey Rourke will get this. Mickey Rourke will understand what I'm doing. and he did. And it's a pulp novel. You know, it's not meant to be taken any more seriously than something that you would spend a dime to read. And on that level, it's a lot of fun and it's very cool. It's super cool. Like you can tell it's one of those like movies that inspired Quentin Tarantino type cool.
I dig it. And I mean, the thing is like, it's got a very like, you know, the plot itself is, I mean, it's dumb, but it's like, there's almost even like a film noir. Honestly, like, as I'm saying, thinking about it, like
very noirish.
Yeah.
Morgan Freeman is the cop that is convinced that Mickey Rourke will never do good, even once he has a pretty face. And the tropes are all there. The stereotypes are all there. And it's all intentional because it's just trying to tell a fun story.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is like Mickey Rourke, you know, he was at one point like the new Marlon Brando. And then I forget which movie it was where he played a boxer. Then he got really into boxing and it was Homeboy. He played
Homeboy.
Maybe it was that one.
That's what where then true.
Instead of trying to be like this like artist, like the Pope of Greenwich Village style, like where he was trying to be like another. I don't know. He started like wanting to be a legitimate tough guy around this point and sort of adversely affected his career. But, you know, it sucks because, like, you know, he just had so much. I don't know. Going back and rewatching young Mickey Rourke is like he just had so much fucking potential. I don't know. It sucks. Not that he didn't go on to make. I mean, he did still make pretty interesting films. You know. Yeah,
I mean, the wrestler makes me
real turds.
The wrestler makes me cry every time. So I mean, it's just one of those things, and I wish. Young actors, I want you to learn a lesson here. I want you to look at Mickey Rourke and a couple of others of his ilk. I would say maybe even Eric Roberts is in this same league. But you should all know, and this is a fact, not even Marlon Brando was Marlon Brando. Like, whatever Marlon Brando was and whatever they place on him as a personality, he was only that for a couple of years. In the same way that Elvis was only Elvis for a couple of years. Nobody's that good. Nobody is as good as they say Marlon Brando was. And Marlon Brando has made as many shit movies as Mickey Rourke has made. Frankly, Marlon Brando has made much better movies than Mickey Rourke has ever made. So I will admit that. But the whole method thing, the method is just an excuse to be an asshole. Auteur theory, similarly on the director's end, it's just an excuse to be an asshole. It doesn't make you special to call yourself an auteur. Kubrick was an auteur and he was fantastic. Kubrick was a genius. The Shining is one of my top 10 favorite movies of all time. I love The Shining. If I saw him treating Shelley Duvall, the way that he treated Shelley Duvall, I would have knocked him out, Kubrick or not. It's not an excuse for bad behavior.
I agree.
So yeah, these guys need to get it out of their head. I just want to go on record
though. I just want to go on record as saying, and this definitely speaks even, I don't know if you've ever seen Rumblefish, but Mickey Rourke is great in it. But again, Mickey Rourke is also unbelievably handsome. And I've said it before. I'm like, I love young Marlon Brando. I love him. But young Marlon Brando looked like fucking young Steve Buscemi. Nobody would give a shit. To be a Marlon Brando or a young Mickey Rourke, yes, you have to have an intense, brooding charisma, but you also have to be unbelievably handsome. Because if you're not, nobody gives a fuck. So you have to be born with an incredible face, and then also all those other things to really be successful. But anyways, that's not a dig on Mickey Rourke, though, because again, like I said, he legitimately did have an amazing screen presence. He was an amazing actor. Vintage Mickey Rourke, I'm always interested to see, because again, the weird thing about Mickey Rourke in '88 is that he did feel like an actor out of his time. He had like even like I'm blanking on the French actor's name, not Alain Delon. Either way,
Alain Delon.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. It might not be, but there's this. He just has this. He has this like old school presence that made him sort of stand out in '88. Like he was an old timey movie star. He just had that vibe. And the thing is, even if he's been in some shitty movies, he's been in some real turds where even he was shitty. But even in the '80s and '90s, even if he was in a shitty movie, he was still interesting. He's a captivating actor. He's very like your eyes go to him. He's got a really distinct style. So, anyways. That's all to say. I will definitely take a look at Johnny Handsome, because again, it's an interesting premise. I didn't realize it was Walter Hill, so I'll definitely check it out.
It's very Walter Hill. It feels like a Walter Hill. To close this out on a high note, 1989 was also the first year that audiences were introduced to John Woo's White Doves. Were you a fan of The Killer? This is a loaded question, because I think the first time I saw The Killer was with you.
No, yes, I was going to say this was the time where. God, was it 80? I would have thought it was.
You had seen The Killer before me.
89. I mean, it was 89.
Us watching The Killer together, I think, had it start with, you haven't seen The Killer? And just immediately popping it in the VCR.
Yeah. So John Woo, who, sadly doesn't really, his name doesn't have the weight that it once carried.
But he's another one. Even John Woo isn't really John Woo.
Exactly.
Everyone, when he came to the United States as a director, everyone treated it like it was the second coming. And Face Off is fun, but.
And he gave us Hard Target, which I still love, but But again, his output in Hong Kong, A Better Tomorrow, literally, it was like he kept making flawless, these insane, just like an action film done by
Michelangelo.
Yeah, exactly. Like he understood he worked almost exclusively with Chow Yun-fat, who made some stinkers in America. But I think it's hard to deny the fact that that Chow Yun-fat is still a legend, still an icon. So is John Woo. It's just their later work is sort of tarnished. But just going back to being a film fan in 1989 and seeing what they did together, they took action film. Now, John Woo wasn't working in like typical Chinese like kung fu movies. They were doing blood and guts, very violent crime thrillers and action films, and doing it better than anybody in the world. And The Killer's not my favorite of his films, but you cannot go wrong with any of them.
It was the first one I saw, and I can't think of a better introduction to what John Woo does. No, yes,
absolutely. It boils down to everything that John Woo would kind of go on for, which is like even down to like what was that?
I was going to say like Hero with two pistols, the white gloves, the slow motion,
the 2 9mm pistols going at the same time,
the assassin with a heart of gold,
which that sort of became Chow Yun-fat's sort of calling card for a while. It's basically, that's, if you're talking about The Killer specifically, Assassin with a Heart of Gold is sort of like the plot line of this movie.
But clearly a big influence on things like Leon the Professional.
Oh, absolutely. He's even gone on he's a hack. He's made some good movies, but he's a hack. But
Besson?
Luc Besson has gone on saying that, he was a huge John Woo fan, and it's like a huge Western action film fan as well. I will say Leon the Professional is a great movie. Luc Besson, not my favorite director. He's made more bad movies than he's made good movies.
No. But Tarantino also claims to be a disciple of John Woo. So
yeah, they say everybody who came after him was like, he literally reinvented the action film in the East, and then inadvertently completely changed action films in the West, because he was the first director since maybe Choi Hart from like the Chopsaki, Kung Fu days that got attention in the West. And man, he was ripped off almost immediately. It's like probably in 1992, everybody who became aware of John Woo in the States then started using John Woo-isms. And then he finally came over, did Hard Target, which I do love. And I thought, definitely wasn't I love Jean-Claude Van Damme, as I've stated, but he does not have the gravitas of John Fat. But, you saw Hard Target, you thought like, well, yeah, it's not, it's a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie. It's the best Jean-Claude Van Damme movie as far as directing and stuff. But we were still hoping for bigger and better things. But instead we got that, and then we got Broken Arrow, and then Face Off is fun, but I think everyone just loved John Woo so much that when Face Off came out, people were like, okay, John Woo's done a good one. John Woo. Yeah, exactly. I agree 100%. If anybody else had directed it, it would have been, what the fuck? But I will say,
still some great Nicolas Cage in that. But
I will agree. I think Nicolas Cage is. But I will say, there's a lot of Face Off fans out there. I'm not one. I find it tedious. I think even Nick Cage, the weird performances, John fucking Travolta. But yeah, it's Anyways, but let's finish with Time of the Killer. Amazing. If you're not familiar with John Woo films, if you're listening to this and you're an action film fan and haven't seen any of the John Woo films, literally you cannot go wrong with any of them. But start off right. Start off with The Killer. Chow Yun-fat just being the baddest. At this point, he was the coolest motherfucker in movies. He was fucking. He was the Chinese Clint Eastwood and then some. Like, he was the baddest motherfucker and just totally believable, and just it's a fucking phenomenal. It's funny, didn't even come up in my search. I'm so glad this is how we're ending, because we get to talk about a fucking masterpiece is the last one. And like I said, and it's not even my favorite John Woo film, but it's like you can't go wrong, honestly, in his original like Chinese output. So
seriously, like, treat yourself to a double feature of The Killer and Hard Boiled, and you can then call it a good night.
Yeah, honestly, like, just keep going with his output. Like, and it's funny because I think I understand he's still working, if I'm not mistaken, or he's made stuff in the last few years. I actually haven't kept up, but like, I know he made a movie in the early thousands I thought was actually pretty good, like a period piece. So A Better Tomorrow. A Better Tomorrow was 86. Yeah. I think that was actually his first. I think
they were already on Better Tomorrow, I love Better Tomorrow 3 by 89, yeah.
Yeah. But again, I Better Tomorrow was great. Fun Hard Boils. But man, maybe actually I'm saying that maybe The Killer is I don't know. It's hard. I used to go back and forth, but
why choose? Love them all.
Exactly. But then you get to some of the what was it? The Wind Talkers or anyways, but
Mission Impossible 2 he was big with, and
a Bullet in the Head. Oh dude, Jesus, Bullet in the Head. Anyways, phenomenal. I need to watch some John Woo movies now. God damn it, Devin.
We've done it again. Well, we've come to the end of another episode. It's definitely going to take me a minute to get ready to do the comedies of 1989. There's some really good dramas out there too. Not the one that won Best Picture. We'll get into that. Not a big fan of the Best Picture winner of 1989. I like the cast, but I don't think I like the movie.
I think we're in a total agreement on that.
But we're going to get into some really good 1989 comedies as well. For all of the depressing dramas of 1989, a lot of hard to deal with subject matters, we're going to need to jump into the more Transylvania twist of it all.
Let's do it.
Just trying to think of a good 80s comedy that wasn't going to give too much away, but I couldn't think of anything. My first thought was Bill and Ted, but I'm like, we already did Bill and Ted. But yes, Bill and Ted was 89.
We can talk about that amazing comedy, My Left Foot.
Oh, it was a real laugh riot.
That was hysterical.
I was going for Dead Poets Society, but yeah, it was a heavy year.
Yeah,
it really was.
A lot of dramatic dramedies.
But thanks for sharing with us some of our favorite action movies and some of our favorite thrillers. I think thrillers kind of got the same treatment sci-fi did last time.
Yeah. 89 was a huge year for movies, man. We could do this whole podcast just on 1989 films. So
ain't that the truth? But in the meantime, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can search us under Den of Sin, CIN, or Den of Sin Podcast. You can also like us and subscribe to us anywhere that you find podcasts. We're up on YouTube now as well. So please, if you like this episode, just go over and hit play on the YouTube episode that you liked, and then, fall asleep or something. Turn down the volume and just let it play. We got to get our numbers up. But this is always fun, James. I love talking to you about this stuff. We don't get paid for this, but if we did, I would still do this for free.
That's right. I feel the exact same way.
And do you have any closing words for everybody?
No, just I can't wait to talk about 1989's The Punisher movie, because I have a lot to say, and I can't wait to revisit. I can't wait to revisit the films of Dolph Lundgren. So.
Same here. All right, everybody, you stay careful, be safe, keep wearing your mask, please. We are so close to the end of the race. It would be a shame to trip on our own shoelaces. So let's make sure that we are vigilant and kicking the hell out of this thing. And until next time, have a good one.
Peace.
Bye.